So this is the series, the nature and culture, and Gehlen Gehlen's book "What is Man" is basically dealing mostly with this question. It's a fundamental question because culture is only humans create culture, and so before there were humans, there was no culture, and so he's dealing with this question. So the title is "What is Man?" Arnold Gehlen's monumental attempt to answer Kant's question. It's just an introduction. So just because we live in 2023, when this book was written in 1940, man meant human. It still means human. It is an unmarked generic English form that covers both sexes, right? Just for the record. So Kant, in his Critique of Pure Reason, in B833, which is a second edition, Kant formulated four famous questions. What can I do? No, that's the topic of this Critique of Pure Reason. What should I do? That's the topic of critique of practical reason. What may I hope? He hasn't a critique on this, but he has some writings about it. And what is man? And what is man? He doesn't have a critique either, but in his Kritik der Urteilskraft, critique of pure judgment, there are passages that are very anthropological and to which I will come back later. And so Arnold Gehlen was a German philosopher who wrote three main monographs, or four. Man, 1940, then Urmensch und Spätkultur, which means primordial man and industrial culture. And then another one about Zeitbilder, about modern art, which is probably the best book ever written about modern art. Actually better than Der Streit um die Wirklichkeit der Welt. Better than Roman Ingarden, I think. Because Roman Ingarden also wrote about modern art, but it's weaker than what Gehlen did. And then he also has a book, his last book called Ethics and Hyperethics, in German Moral und Hypermoral, which is also a great book. So the full title of the book is Man, His Nature and His Situatedness in the World. He was born in 1904 and died in 1976. He was a friend of my grandfather, and I actually started reading Gehlen because my godfather was a PhD student of my grandfather, and he did his PhD about Gehlen. And so then when I was 20, he gave me a German edition, a pocketbook edition of Der Mensch, and I read it, and I was completely thrilled. Gehlen was influenced by the philosophers Nikolai Hartmann and Max Scheler, who were his teachers more or less. And both of them I'm using myself a lot. But also by Immanuel Kant, Arthur Schopenhauer, Friedrich Nietzsche, and the positivist Wilhelm Dilthey, as well as the biological anthropology of his time. He was, unlike most of his contemporaries, never influenced at all by Heidegger. He despised him, though Heidegger was, of course, much more famous than Gehlen. Gehlen himself never used any of Heidegger's ideas. He never even quotes him. He just avoided him. And what is very interesting, like his teacher Max Scheler, he also made use of American pragmatism. He uses very much Charles Sanders Peirce, William James, and George Herbert Mead, and even Dewey. So he really read them and appreciated them, which is very special and unusual at the time. So he really recognized their originality and their contribution to the history of philosophy. Or I would say, to results of philosophy, because some of what they saw are results of philosophy. Here you see the 1940 original edition. You see this is still the writing is the classical German writing, which was used until World War II, and it's called Fraktur, and it was then later the Germans took on the modern fonts that we use today, but until 1945 they still used this. So Gehlen, so I think that since the 1920s we have a massive decline in Western philosophy. Today we basically don't have real philosophy anymore, with a few exceptions. But Scheler was one of the last truly original philosophers in our Western traditions. So this decline has several hallmarks. So the first huge hallmark is Western Marxism. So you have to know that Karl Marx himself had no academic pupil. He didn't even have an academic, effect. Nobody, after his death, nobody in academia ever thought of him, used him. He was just, the huge movement at the time was there were two huge schools. There was Austrian realism, about which Barry has written a whole book, and then there was positivism, French positivism. These were the two huge movements of the time, and Marxism. There was no Marxism. Only there was political Marxism in the social democratic and communist parties, but it was not a matter of science. And then came Bloch and Lukács, who were the first generation who made Western Marxism an academic discipline. They invented Western Marxism as a form of science. I mean, I don't think it's really science, but they, as a branch of philosophy, and then Horkheimer and Adorno, and then later Rawls, Habermas and Roth. So Western Marxism is a hallmark of Western decline, because it is basically in ideology and not a philosophy, right? But it's called itself philosophy, but it's a pure ideology. It has political goals, and Marx himself wrote in his thesis on Feuerbach, Marx wrote, philosophers have tried to interpret the world, but we should change it. And so they made themselves agents of changing the world via philosophy, which I think is fundamentally wrong. And here I agree, of course, with Edmund Burke and Hegel. And so this is one of the hallmarks of decline. Another one is postmodernism, which overlaps with Marxism. So we have here Bataille, who was one of the fathers of postmodernism, and Georges Bataille. You should maybe take a look, just read one paper by Bataille. It's just stunning. I mean, the level of anti-rationalism, and also actually he replaces God by the headless God, which is kind of a devil. It's really interesting. And Heidegger, who's also these two are the real fathers of postmodernism. And then after World War II, we have French disciples, Derrida, Foucault, and Rorty, Western disciples, and they dominate Western humanities and philosophy. So yesterday at the reception of my hotel was a student from this university studying English, and because my door didn't work, I mean my key didn't work, I had to go back to the reception again, and then I had a discussion with her. Well, she came to my door to make sure it was really a technical problem and not my problem. And then we discussed what she's learned at university. It's shocking. I mean, it's just shocking. I mean, she's completely, her head is completely filled up with cultural Marxism and postmodernism, deconstructivism. It's actually, it's totally like an anti-rational religion. Then we also have another hallmark of the kind of skepticism. So one of the roots of skepticism in the West is Quine, who's very influential in analytic philosophy. We have anti-metaphysics. So anti-metaphysics is Heidegger. And we have also anti-rationalism in Rorty, Habermas, Popper and his school. Of course, they all think they are rationalists, but they really are not. And if you want to know more about it, read by David Stove, Popper and others. What's the subtitle? For protagonists of skepticism or something. For modern anti-rationalists is the subtitle. Popper and others.
No.
I think it's called like this.
I'll find it.
Yeah, find it. It's David Stove. It's really great. It's
Popper and After.
Popper and After. It's such a great book. You should really read it. And Habermas and Rorty also belong to this. I mean, if you want to see this, you can read Rorty's last monograph. It's called Solidarity, Irony, and something. It's maybe the best book to quickly understand the rot that is in the skepticism and anti-rationalism. And of course, you have also skepticism in analytic philosophy, and then you have also scholasticism in analytic philosophy. David Lewis and David Chalmers, which I think, at the very least, David Lewis wrote one good book. I haven't read it, but I've read some papers of him. But I think they are scholasticists, and they are very, this whole idea of multiple possible worlds. It's just, I think it's scholasticistic and decadent. Gehlen, though, was an original thinker. With a rock-solid foundation in Western rationalism and metaphysics, also a realist who developed a new branch of philosophy called philosophical anthropology. He was, like most realists, also a conservative thinker. And, okay, this to give you some context why he's so exceptional, because he was basically one of the last of this generation of really great philosophy. And here is a simplified schema of the Gehlen theory of man. So now we start to get into, first of all, do you have questions concerning this provocative slide? Yes?
Heidegger is weird because it's in the it's exactly in the middle between very interesting phenomenology and everything that came later. Is there anything interesting at all from Heidegger to read?
Heidegger.
Yeah.
Oh, sure. So I think Heidegger's writings before 1935 are really interesting to read. I think that Heidegger is one of the top 100 most important philosophers of the Western history tradition. But he is, of course, he belongs, if you have, if you look at philosophy, you have basically, you can distinguish three big camps, right? Idealists, realists, and skeptics. And these are, of course, the skeptics. So he was against rationalism and against metaphysics. For him, he believed that rationalism and metaphysics created modernism, which is going to destroy man. And so he was a total adversary of modernism, and he believes that we have to go back to a philosophy that is before Plato. And so, but his early works, I mean, Sein und Zeit is very interesting. Some of his lectures on metaphysics are interesting. But what he did later on was just terrible. And also the promises he makes in Sein und Zeit, his main work, his most famous work, he cannot fulfill them. So he promises to prove that Kant was wrong, that he wants to develop a new theory of cognition, and he fails. I mean, there are good ideas in the book, but it's a fragment first of all, right? It's only half finished, and it fails because despite all the good ideas, it doesn't really come to a conclusion. It doesn't create a conclusive view. But still, Heidegger saw many things really well, especially the problems of the modern world. He was very sensitive to this, and I think he became a Nazi because he wanted to, by force, restore a better world, right? So I hope this answers your question. So I would suggest you should read early Heidegger.
Yeah, I've read parts of Sein und Zeit, but it's interesting because sometimes it's like the father of continental, quote-unquote continental, postmodernist, deconstructionist philosophy. At the same time, you read like Stein or Scheler, and they're really impressed by Heidegger. They're engaging with him in a positive way.
Scheler not so much.
No, you're right.
But Stein, totally.
Stein for sure.
Yeah, Stein totally. And he must have. My grandfather was a friend of his, and he always told me that Heidegger was very impressive, very charismatic, super clever, very eloquent. He was just, and also he was he had a lot of ideas. So he was. But in the end, he was a terrible person because in 1974, he wrote to his brother that it was such a pity that the Nazis failed to exterminate the Jews. 74, fuck. I mean, he's really terrible, But the young Heidegger had good ideas. But I think the school he founded is doomed to fail. It's like Sextus Empiricus or Pyrrhon of Elis, these skeptics, and it always fails because skepticism is incompatible with life. You can't live, if you want to live in this world, you can't be a skepticist because then there's nothing reliable, you have no foundation, no grounding, everything goes, and so therefore skepticism, and he is a typical skepticist, is unstable. And then, in his book on irony, solidarity, and I always forget the third ingredient, rot, he says that you must be aloof, and as a philosopher you have this high ground where you can be a skepticist and still live. You also find this motive in French existentialism. I just find it despicable because it doesn't understand that in the end, what we do as philosophers, and you still can, despite all of this, you can still do good philosophy. Look at Barry, and it's still a great profession, and I still love it. But what philosophers really do, they really have to interpret the world. That's their job, because science can't, but philosophy can. And this interpretation of the world then is basically diluted down to the teachers who teach at school, and to the pupil, and to the culture. And if it's poisoned, like Heidegger's philosophy, then this poison will, in the end, dilute down or cascade down to the society. And that's why it's so dangerous, and that's why it is actually this decline of Western philosophy is indicative of a decline of our culture, because in the end what philosophers think determines the way we see the world, and so or it's a dialectical relationship between culture, society, and the philosophers, but they basically embody it, and so it's a problem. Okay, and again, you're right, spot on. He was between in terms of temporality, he was between the peak of phenomenology, which was the early phenomenology of Scheler, the early Husserl, Reinach, and so on. And he was basically one generation later, but very original and very good. Okay, so let's go on. So this is his theory. So he has a theory of animals, which we will now learn. And animals are basically embedded in nature totally, and man is not. And he sees man as a defective being because man has no adaptation to an ecological niche or niche. Every animal has an adaptation. Humans are not adapted. And because human being is not adapted to the world, he's a world-open being. So for example, a bee, the insect, can only perceive the part of reality to which it is instinctively bound to react. It doesn't perceive what is not relevant for its instinctive behavior. That's the case with all animals. They have only a very narrow, selective, genetically encoded selective view of the world. And we are world open. We can look at everything. And we can even build technology to look at more than we can with a bare naked eye. So this is world openness. And this world openness then leads to sensory overload. So we have to consciously and subconsciously select what we perceive. And man, under this pressure of the sensory overload, develops a new sensory motor function that is like what animals do as well, because when animals move, they also perceive. This is what Charles Sanders Peirce was the first to see, and William James. The sensory motor cycle in perception. It's called the sensory motor theory of perception. And then phenomenologists took it up. I don't know whether Husserl also saw this at the same time, independently of them. I think so. Right, Barry? So Husserl also has kind of a sensory motor theory of perception in his phenomenology, which is, but the motor aspect in Husserl is not spelled out so much. It's spelled out more in American pragmatism, and then very strongly have it in later phenomenologists like the French Marxist phenomenologist, Merleau-Ponty.
And in Gibson.
And then J.J. Gibson. And I have
used to teach.
Yes, and I have a page of J.J. Gibson coming up, by the way. You will be happy to see it. And so then you have basically, you can get the slides right. Then you have, and language is a sensory motor function, and you will get all the details later on the slide. And then we have certain aspects of humans which he calls drivenness. Then we have his key term, his central anthropological term is deburdening, in German Entlastung. So last means burden. Is a suffix that is used in German to describe a state. So and end means de. So it's basically deburdening or unburdening. And I think the English translation of this book, which is relatively poor, I think, calls it relief. But relief is really not so. When I have to go to the restroom and do my business there after that, I'm relieved of this, Or if I'm very, very thirsty and drink water, I'm relieved of the thirst. But Entlastung means something different, so I call it de or unburdening. And then man is an acting being creating institutions, and then culture replaces nature. So for humans, there is no nature. Humans always live in a cultural environment. If humans die in nature. So if a naked human is put into nature without tools, the human can't survive. The first thing is he has to make himself tools and clothes and so on, and because our skin doesn't really protect us, and this is what you can see in Robinson Crusoe, right? But Robinson Crusoe, when he arrives at the island, he has already clothes and some tools that he can get from the ship, and then he's building up. He's basically it's an enlightenment narrative of how civilizations get built, right? And by using Protestant virtues, right? Of not over-consuming, saving, reinvesting, and so on. And this is also what humans also have to do. Even primitive cultures, they replace nature. So this is a high-level view of his theory. It is unique. I mean, there was no such theory of man before, and it's just really, I can recommend to everyone to read this book. Also, even if you can only read the English. So let's start with deburdening, which we'll get back to later. So it's a central theme in Gehlen's thinking. It is man's ability to detach himself from immediate biological necessity, which frees him for cultural behavior. So we can uncouple ourselves and our activities, mental or practical, from instinctive drivers, and so that means if a monkey is hungry and you put an apple on this table, the monkey cannot resist. The monkey has to go and get this apple. immediately. It can't postpone its desire to eat the apple. And animals are always like this. So when you teach animals something, you always have to couple what you teach to a positive or negative reinforcer. Either you give food or you beat the animal, or give it an electric shock. This is how conditioning works, right? But it's always, you have to basically utilize the power of the instinctive action cycle of the animal to teach it something. And man can overcome. So, and I will have great examples later on, this urge to respond to the immediate need of the physical. The only urge that you cannot really postpone very long is breathing. But even this we can postpone for 3 minutes. You know, and deep divers, these hypoxia divers, even do 5 minutes. And it is no animal can do this. And so this gives us freedom to learn and act without the context of a biological necessity, which are foraging, hunting, eating, reproduction, childcare, and flight. These are the most essential, and breathing I didn't put in, but these are the most, and animals are always driven by this, plus they rest. Sleep I didn't put, but sleep is of course also included here. And the detachability of a free experimental behavior from biological necessity, this is deburdening. The behavior can be executed independently of a trigger, so you can actually deburden yourself without having an immediate reward. You don't need a reinforcement situation. And not only motor action, so the movement of the body, including language, of course language is a movement of the body, I'm moving my speech organs, but also perception is deburdened. So that means that if the burden that we have as world-open beings is that we have flow of sensory information from all channels, right? And we now select freely among them which to use and which not to use. So for example, nobody now is listening to this noise made by this apparatus. We are basically suppressing it, and we can focus, and this is also deburdening. From the multitude of possible experience, we focus our intentionality on certain aspects of our inner mental or outer. So this is important. We can also do this with the inner mental experience, right? So if you have pain that comes from inside your body and you have to do a task, you can actually focus and ignore the pain. You can think, is this pain so bad that it will kill me, or can I kind of endure it for a while and finish my task? You can finish this. An animal can't do this. So an animal is then completely focused on getting rid of what causes the pain. And small children, you can see how they learn this. So at the age of 4 or 5, they learn to deal with the pain. They learn that they can actually accept the pain for a while and wait for a resolution, right? This is super interesting. If you have children, you will see this when they develop. It's actually good to read the book before having children, by the way. Because it contains a lot of material about children, which is very helpful. So sometimes when our children were small, I was getting it out of my library and showing it to my wife and say, look, but Gehlen says it, you know. I said, oh yeah, you're right. And this allows man to overcome the sensory overload and select adequate aspects of reality as a foundation for acts. So this is the core of what deburdening is in Scheler and Gehlen.
Did Gehlen have children?
I don't think so. I think look at him. He was very strange. I mean, you have to, I think he was unmarried, you have to, I don't know actually so much about his personal life, but my grandfather said he was a super inaccessible, difficult man. And there is a wonderful debate on TV that you can find on YouTube, where he debates against Joseph Beuys about art. When he wrote his big book on art, afterwards he was invited by ARD, and he debates, which is like ABC or CNN here, to debate with Joseph Beuys, was a very famous modern artist. I think he only created crap, and they debate about art, and it's just he's using ontological arguments from Nikolai Hartmann. It's wonderful. It's really wonderful because he's really saying, no, ontologically you must be wrong. He's saying on TV. it's so wonderful and it's very interesting because.
But it's all in German.
Yeah, but you could watch it.
But maybe you can get because of AI, you could get.
You could subtitle it.
Subtitles.
It's just
Someone should do that.
Yeah, you could probably run it in an app that subtitles. It's just so great.
There is also a YouTube video of him debating with Adorno.
Yes. And there, of course, he never mentioned Adorno so he never mentions Heidegger, he never mentioned Adorno, he never mentioned any of these, because he hated them. I mean, he was so, my grandfather said he was as a person very difficult, hard to access. His brother was the founder of the German CIA. So the CIA tasked his brother with founding the organization Gehlen, which was later turned into BND, which is our CIA. Basically, it's a subsidiary of the CIA. It is, and so anyhow, and so he was just very funny and clever. So now let's start with. So we go through this schema in more detail, and I will not do so much on the later. I will do a bit on this. But this is already a lot of material like this, so I didn't cover the entire book. It's 500 pages, but the most important aspect. So what does he say on animals? So animals are specialized instinct-driven beings which are intelligent but not world-open. So what does that mean? So all animals are specialized to a certain environment, a natural habitat. Though for some, like rats, pigeons, and many bacteria, that is relatively broad, this habitat. But it's still a habitat, right? Animal behavior is driven by instincts. They have a selective view of their environment which is optimized to their adaptation. They are not world open. Animals react to their environment within the boundaries of this adaptation. So that animals can never act outside their adaptation realm, their habitat, and they only react to sensory input that is basically what J.J. Gibson calls an affordance to them. So that is tuned to their instinctive behavior. And they can learn if the triggers of their behavior, the positive and negative reinforcement that's called behaviorism, are used to condition them. And these triggers, they need to be tuned to and only some animals, so you can't teach a tick anything, but you can teach, or fish very hard, but you can teach higher animals like birds and monkeys, and also dogs and horses and cats. Cats are hard to teach, but to a certain extent you can. Like lions, they are big cats, you can teach them to do tricks in the circus. But you always need to use something that is tuned to their habitat and their specialization. They can perform intelligent acts. That is what Ben and I call primordial animal intelligence, which means that they can find novel solutions to previously unencountered problems without previous training. So that's quite remarkable. They can find novel solutions to previously unencountered problems without previous training, which machines can never do, for example. So they have this intelligence, but these acts of intelligence are always occur within the triggers defined by the instincts, which is not, we don't point it out so much in the book, unfortunately. But so that means, but it doesn't matter, they mean that when, for example, a crow, there's a movie you can find on YouTube where a crow has to solve a very complicated puzzle. It's a machine where it has to pull levers and turn wheels to get to its food. And the crow manages to do it. What? Crow. Thank you. The crow manages to do that, but only because it wants to get the food. So if you would put there, you can get the original edition of Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit as a reward, which I would actually solve a lot of puzzles to get this, but it would, so it always needs to be a goal within its instinctive framework. And animals, they cannot escape from the pressure of triggering situations. So when you put an animal into a situation that triggers instinctive behavior, it has to obey. It can't avoid it, right? And so when an animal is hungry and you give it food, it's very, very hard for the animal to resist to this, only when it's conditioned, which means that it has internalized mostly negative reinforcement. So you can have a hungry dog, put food in front of him and say, no, sit, and now eat. But you have to beat the dog, or to punish him otherwise to get him to this behavior. And so then the conditioning of the fear of the beating is stronger than the necessity to immediately eat the food. And Skinner has written a lot about this. So the whole behavioral literature very clearly has seen this, that you can only condition, and that's why behaviorism fails on humans. Because humans can be conditioned to a certain extent, but because humans have world openness and Lastung, deburdening, they cannot be conditioned in the way that animals can be conditioned, because the condition of animals is based on their specialized instinct-driven behavioral cycles there. And soon you can ask questions. I just do 2 more slides on animals. And so here's a tick. And Gehlen says, which I think is a great, so sometimes I have literally quotes so that you can get a feeling of how cool it is. Once we know the sensory apparatus and the effector organs of an animal, we can reconstruct its natural habitat. This is a very, very cool sentence because it basically says the natural habitat of an animal specialization is so, is completely explains the animal, so that when you do the want to re-engineer the natural habitat, you look at the tools the animal has. So, for example, here you see a tick. It's an arachnid, ixodes, the small things that suck your blood and transmit diseases. And they sit, there are several kinds, some of them can crawl onto you, others drop themselves. Most, I think, live on branches of trees and drop themselves. And they sit there, and they can detect an animal's breath or body odor. They can some can sense the body heat, the moisture or vibration. So they have organs to sense, but they are blind. Okay, but they can sense most of the breath or body odor. And when they sense this, they drop or crawl onto the host and start to draw blood. And then this triggers the release of conserved sperm. So before the female, she has sex with the male tick and then conserves the sperms inside of her. For months she can conserve them. And I think the male dies after sex, as usual with arachnids. And then once she drinks the blood, the blood in her stomach releases the sperms and the fertilization of the eggs happens. And once she has sucked enough blood, she detaches herself from the host and lays its eggs and then dies. And so the entire behavior is totally programmed. Right? There's no choice, nothing. The sensory perception, the motor capabilities, everything is, so to speak, tuned to fulfill this cycle. So the world of the tick consists of odor, heat, moisture, and vibration. It is a closed habitat world. The organs of the tick are perfectly tuned to its adaptation and habitat. This is similar with all animals. The human is the only exception. This is really remarkable. And this is what in modern biology is now not seen anymore. Many biologists, animals are also intelligent and they have culture. This is complete nonsense. Animals don't have culture. They live in a closed world determined by their instincts. So now, so animals, in other words, have categorical reactions to their environment from which they cannot deviate. These are affordances, and we will get to affordances soon. So Gehlen says there are optical animals such as certain monkeys and birds feeding on immobile fruit, and they react in a compulsory manner to shapes and colors. For example, chickens cannot react to other stimuli than those of the optical channel. A chicken in a room with grains stops picking them off if the room is darkened, and even if the grains cover its feet and the sound of dropping grains is heard and it is hungry. So if you put a chicken into a room where you drop grains from the top, you hear the ticking of the grains, its feet are covered with grains. If you darken the room, if you dim it down slowly until it's dark, actually it will then, even if it's hungry, go to sleep. It won't eat. Many experiments have shown this. It's super fascinating. Because only the optical channel is a trigger for the instinctive behavior of eating. It can only eat when it sees the grains. And humanoids compulsively react to food decoy. So if you make a decoy of an orange, they cannot resist taking them. So if you now have an orange and you make a hole in the front of the orange, then the apple will hesitate, right? Because, for example, if you make a hole and paint it white, the monkey will, because then the orange doesn't look like the trigger orange anymore, and so it's not an affordance for the animal, and it will not eat it. But if it's not the same orange decoy with the hole is turned around, the monkey will immediately grab it. So even if you turn it around in front of its eyes, it will immediately grab it and try to eat it. And also, if you have a plastic decoy and put it many times before the monkey, it will always put it in its mouth 5 or 6 times before rejecting it. Because if the rest fits, it will very hard for it to resist trying it out. So this is super characteristic of the compulsory closed world of the animals. Also, hunting animals react to movement patterns and the shapes of the moving entity, which triggers their hunting behavior if they are hungry. So if a hunting animal like a lion has eaten his full, he won't hunt. But if he's hungry, especially the flight behavior will trigger. So if you encounter a cougar, if you hike in the Rockies and encounter a cougar, and if you do that and shout and go towards the cougar, it will not hunt you. But if you run away, it will hunt you because you will behave like a prey. And I mean, with a big lion or tiger, I think it's not a good idea to do anything, you know. Even if you do this, it will still hunt you, but with a cougar, which is a bit smaller, they actually don't hunt you. And there are always, if you hike by the Western Rockies, there are these panels that explain this behavior to you, what you should do when you see a cougar. And so this is then triggering the hunting behavior. And if you look at movies where you see hunting animals, it's inescapable. You know, they just perform this program. And I mean, you have this in human behavior. For example, in the middle of sex, when humans have sex, you also have at a certain point the behavior becomes very instinct driven. But this is one of the few areas of human behavior where you still have this strong determination of the behavior by instinct. So the specialized perception of the animal necessarily entails a certain behavior that is necessary for the survival of the animal. And within this perception and action range of the habitat, the intelligence and learning are possible but not without it. They are constrained to the setting defined by the perceptual and actional range. This is very, very important. Okay, I think, let me see. Yes, before we get to affordances, any questions so far on animals?
Yeah, there are definitely huge differences between animals or lesser animals and humans, even mammals like primates and humans. But can you say that is a qualitative and categorical distinction instead of a continuous, that we are way better than them in many other aspects? And how do you draw the distinction?
The distinction is that humans are not bound to, humans don't have a natural habitat, and humans don't have properties. Humans are not bound to predetermined behavior. So that's a fundamental difference. That humans don't have instincts, or they have, but very little. And that human behavior, so the humans have something that replaces instinct, that's socialization. So humans, when a horse is born, it can walk, I think, on the third day, and run on the, I don't know, after a week or two. I mean, but humans have to be socialized, and that's because we don't have a programmed part of our behavior is very, very small. And so this is the fundamental difference, and the other fundamental difference is the world openness. So that which means that humans can decide themselves which part of the world they perceive, whereas animals always only perceive the part of the world that is necessary to trigger their instinctive behavior. They can't say, I spend time on something else. They always live in the present. They don't have a past. They have a past, but very little. But they don't have a future. They always live in the present. They can't plan a bit, but the planning is always instinctively driven. And so this is the fundamental. It's not a continuous difference. It's a radical difference. And this difference happened in evolution when basically our predecessors lost their specialization. So the monkeys that came before us, they could living on trees. But when they descended from the trees and started to walk on 2 feet, they lost. That was 4 million years or 3.5 million years ago, Australopithecus. And there's an anthropological museum close to Cologne where you see a footstep, a left foot, adult footstep of an Australopithecus, which is 3.6 million years old, and then you see a right-sided, very small footstep of a few inches that is a child. And of course, the father or mother anthropoid must have had the child by its hand. They were walking like this. The mother or father had the left foot in front, the child the right foot. They're walking like this together. You have the 2 footprints. It drives you to tears to see that, because it shows you already, this elementary human pattern already in this footprint. It's totally amazing. And when this happened, there was a qualitative change, a categorical change, which occurred when these anthropoids lost their specialization and we started to be able to make choices. Animals can't really make choices. I mean, they can choose between 2 preys, between 2 foraging objects, and so on, between mating partners, but all within this determined world in which they live, which is the world of their instincts and their pre-programmed behavior. And it is actually much more stable as a way to survive. I mean, animals don't have psychiatric diseases, right? So psychiatric diseases of the mind are a specialty of humans, and they are. And you can drive, I mean, what's the name of Pavlov? Drove the dogs mad, yeah. But it requires a lot of work. But usually to drive an animal mad is only possible in domesticated fashion, and you can actually cure them. So there's a literature about how to cure conditioned animals. And because still this madness that they have is quite superficial. And so you see also this among, there are very aggressive domesticated dogs which are also kind of mad, right? But this is a human effect on them, but usually you don't have mental diseases in animals, and that's because animals, you need humans to induce them, and that's because animals, it's a much more stable way to live. So humans are very unstable because they don't have this fixed. But this question we'll get back to when we cover humans. Now we are still on the animals. So any more questions regarding animals?
So if a given animal would have had a mutation in its brain, which would be parallel to the mutation which caused a given human infectious disease, it wouldn't thrive and
infectious disease.
Sorry, a
mental disease.
A mental disease. It wouldn't thrive. It wouldn't have children, and so it would immediately disappear.
So first of all, you don't have one mutation, but the two major. Let's not look at dementia now, but the mental diseases of the young are schizophrenia and depression, or depressive manic illness, so cyclothymia. And those two diseases, the psychosis, and the psychosis are both multiple inheritance. I think that actually probably half of the genome is affected, or 10% of the genome. So it's a huge. You have many genes affected when you.
Okay, then.
But if the animal has such a defect, it will not survive.
Yeah. So
Period.
Talk about it from the other side then. In virtue of what did that mutation survive among humans?
Oh, because the genetic disposition that we have gives us so much selection advantages. That's why we dominate in many respects now Earth. And so the price to pay for this complexity is failure.
Okay.
So it's like with complicated machines. The more complicated a machine is, I mean, look at CERN or the Large Hadron Collider. It must be repaired all the time. I think it's only operative 20% of the time or 30% because most of the time it has to be repaired. Look at the German Leopard 2 tank in Ukraine. I mean, even if it's not damaged by a Russian attack, it's repaired 50% of the time. It's under repair. And it's because it's so bloody complicated. I mean, you call the American equivalent, the Abrams tank. It's so complicated that they have to be an airplane. Basically, whenever an airplane lands, it's actually repaired. I mean, they check everything, and I think 10% of the airplanes go into repair. So if you have a fleet of modern airplanes, all the time 10-15% are in constant repair because it's just so brittle. This is super complex, and the most complicated entity. It's not a machine, but the most complicated entity there is the human brain. It's the price we pay for the incredible power the brain has. Is this proneness to diseases. So now we come to affordances, and this is so interesting. So Gehlen in 1940 develops his version of the concept affordance. He proposed in a generation which Gibson proposed a generation later. So Gibson says in the ecological approach to visual perception, which the affordances of the environment are what it offers the animal, what it provides or furnishes, either for good or ill. It implies the complementarity of the animal and the environment. So the grain or the orange are example of such optical affordances for the monkey and the chicken. And so this is super interesting. So this was in 1966. It's also very interesting that Gibson's theory is about visual perception, not about acoustic perception, and that's because most of the examples that are visible in nature of affordances are visual, and also the human is a visual animal. So also our affordances are also visual, right? And a very classical, very classical affordance in humans is, of course, the sexual object of sexual desire, which is very visually defined, you know. And so Gehlen saw the same phenomenon much earlier. He calls affordances carriers of meaning for the animal, Bedeutungsträger des Tieres, and describes how the entire natural habitat is full of affordances for the animal, mainly food, mating partners, and predators, right? And also for higher species, their offspring. So you know that lower species don't care of their offspring. You know, the offspring just has to decope with itself. But higher species, of course, groom and breed and care for their offspring. And so, but it's mostly food, mating partners, and predators. And so when they see them, they actually, behavior is triggered. For food, it's eating. For mating partners, is trying to convince the mating partner and then mating. And for predators, it's flight behavior. And animals only sense and realize their affordances. They systematically ignore the rest of their environment, have no senses for it, cannot make sense of it. So when you give a monkey an object that is not similar to an affordance object, it will just ignore it. It will never do anything with it. Now, monkeys have affordances that are relatively similar to human affordances. So therefore, you can, in the zoo, you give them a tricycle and you can get them to ride it, you know. I mean, they won't do it on their own, but if you help a bit, you know, then they will do it. And so this is then, you know, spectacular, and you think, oh, they are very close to us. But in reality, they don't even perceive non-affordances. And this is also fundamentally different, you know. So because they just don't have a sense for it. They just don't realize that it's even there. And human beings, on the contrary, have sensory overload because we can perceive everything, and we need to make choices. And there are diseases in which the choice can't be made anymore. And so in schizophrenia, some forms of schizophrenia, the people are exposed to the sensory overload. And they are completely desperate. I've had such patients and treated them myself. Also, you have this in post-traumatic stress disorder. When people have suffered enormous traumata in war by sensory overload of sound and noise and smell of burned human flesh, what they've experienced, you know, you should read Ernst Jünger's In Stahlgewitter. It's about the experience of war. It is the best book ever written about it. In English, it's In Torrents of Steel, I think it's called. And it describes World War I, and when you come out of such an experience, you also have this problem that you cannot protect yourself against the sensory input anymore, which is called post-traumatic stress disorder. But usually humans can cope with it. And I find it I realized when I reread the book now to prepare for this lecture for the first time that Gehlen has a very similar view of Gibson a generation earlier. But of course Gibson didn't know Gehlen. And when I read Gehlen for the first time, I didn't know Gibson because I didn't know Barry.
Gibson knew Merleau-Ponty.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, that's true. So, okay, so this was about animals. So this is not a negative view of animals. Gehlen actually repeats many times in the book that animals have an easier life. They don't have to plan, they don't have to worry about the future, they live in the present. They live according to the rules that are encoded in their genome, and they are in harmony with their natural habitat. And it's not a chauvinistic view of animals. It's actually a very positive view of animals. Okay, now man is, according to him, the defective being. What does that mean? So man is unfinished and open and must make himself to something. He has no fixed position in the world, is forced to act according to a plan which needs regular adaptation to survive. Man must interpret his position in the world and towards others, and this requires a view of the world. And Nietzsche called us the non-fixed being, nicht festgestelltes Wesen. So a lot of what Gehlen uses Scheler and Nietzsche a lot. And he thinks that Nietzsche was inconsistent, of course, like everybody knows, but he had many good ideas. And one is this idea of human as a nicht festgestelltes Wesen, the non-fixed being. Traditional philosophy, and this he says on the first page of the book, in monism, describes man as a mind-body continuum. Barry and I are also monists who also describe human beings as a mind-body continuum in our book. And I mean, dualism is a bit different, but monists describe it as a continuum. But what does that mean? What is special about man? Why did nature create a being that has an irritable consciousness prone to disturbance and errors, as I just mentioned with mental disease? Why does man have a mind which dominates his behavior instead of instinct like all the other animals? Why do we have language, imagination, will, and knowledge? Why is there moral behavior? Why does man have motor capabilities surpassing every animal in their flexibility? Why can we imagine and invent motor behavior? We have invented language, calculus, violin, and chess. These are all inventions of human, right? I mean, think of it. Animals have their predefined behavior. Sometimes, so think of the colibri, making how many 100 movements per second? You know, colibri like moving like very fast. It's very, very fascinating. And so it's a specialized behavior, but it's inherited and unalterable. But if you listen to Glenn Gould's Italian concerto, the third movement, he plays it like a colibri. I mean, it's already very fast. It's very hard to play, even if you play the regular pace, but he plays almost twice as fast. It's just, how can a human being do this? Or think of, you know, a famous Paganini, the violin Paganini etude, I don't know how it's called in English. It's so fast. It's almost at the resolution level of the human hearing organ. So you can still hear, but it's incredible. And these guys, you know, these people, these violinists, they manage to do this. It's all invented behavior, right? You have to. It's fascinating. How does this come about?
So colibri is a genus of hummingbird.
Yes. So the special role of man has been established, of course, since the pre-Socratic philosophy. I give two of my favorite examples here. On the left hand I have Holy Thomas Aquinas. He says that man is devoid of protective or powerful body. He has an imperfect body compared to the animals, but has a perfect soul. This is very Plotinus-like. Yeah, it comes from Plato and Plotinus. It's Neoplatonic. The soul is capable to grasp universals. He says, this is a literal quote, has the power towards the infinite. Right? So this is very interesting. So these are two aspects of the human mind. So the human mind can distinguish between two types of infinity, right? The infinity of natural numbers and the infinity of real numbers. And Cantor has done this. This is what he means, you know. And of course, Thomas Aquinas didn't know this yet, but he sees this, that we can think towards the infinite, and that we have universals, you know, which is incredible. Of course, only humans have universals, and it's interesting that he is relating this not to the mind but to the soul, because for him that's one. And that he chooses these two things, which are in the end very, very fundamental properties of humans, to grasp universal and infinite. And therefore, nature had to take away the instincts, and then in its place, man possesses reason and his hands, which are the tools of the tools. That's from De Regimine Principium. Sorry, it's typo here. So it's the beginning, it's in the introduction of the Regimine Principium. Did you know how Thomas of Aquinas worked? So he had 3 secretaries, and he was dictating 3 books at a time. So he had in his mind the 3 texts. Then he went for the first secretary, dictated as much as the secretary could remember. Then he went to the second one, dictated from the second book, and this and he did this for hours and hours. Against him, I could actually skydive under the carpet. You know, I mean, in terms of mental capability, this guy is incredible. And so he saw already that man has reason at his hands, and this is so critical because our hands and reason are connected, as we will see when we go further along this lecture. So he already saw what distinguishes, that hand distinguishes man. Immanuel Kant says that nature gave man reason, freedom of the will, but denied him instincts and supplies from inherited knowledge. So by this he means genetically encoded behavioral patterns, as we would now say. Man has to create everything out of his own. Quote, man is tasked to work himself upwards towards happiness, but he can then only attribute the gain to himself. That's very Prussian. Actually, we have to work hard, but then you can be proud that you achieved it. He was a Prussian, I mean, through and through. But it's still funny. Man is devoid of proper anatomical and physiological means to survive. He must make his existence himself. So both Kant and Thomas saw this already very clearly. And I think it's very stunning that Thomas saw it already. 800 years ago. So, I mean, Thomas is always worth reading, by the way. Even his various proofs of God are so entertaining. It's really great. So if you have time and don't know what to do, you can always read Thomas. It's just great. So, Gehlen sees man as a defective being. He says Mängelwesen. So Wesen means being and Mängel means defect. So human anatomy does not offer a competitive advantage in any environment. Humans are sensitive to cold, heat, rain and sun. So while fish are perfectly competitive in water, humans can barely swim, you know. Actually they can't. Only in culture they learn it. human physiology does not excel at anything. We cannot run very fast, we cannot swim, or if we learn only very slowly, we are poor climbers. I mean, if once I was climbing in the Alps, they're very difficult in the Berner Oberland, and then one of these wild animals, you know, it was just running. I mean, how they call it, the horns, Berggämse, you know. These
Springbok.
yeah, something like this. I mean, it was running there. It's incredible how it could climb, but it was just running on its 4 feet. I mean, our muscle strength is weaker than that of many big mammals. Our teeth are not good at eating raw meat. Our naked hands cannot be used for hunting. We cannot kill most prey animals without weapons. So really, humans are quite weak. Humans are born helpless and remain so for many years, need to be carried around and taken care of intensely for many years. Humans have no specialization to any environment. Humans cannot rely on instincts. We have reflexes and some instincts, but most of the behavior requires active socialization. So children cannot learn to speak without socialization, for example. Humans can only survive by collaborating in social institutions and by shaping nature to culture. So this is clear. If humans, so from the beginning onwards, the earliest traces of humanoids we always find the necessity to shape nature. The most famous example is the stone carved to a point at the big Faustkeil, the English term of it, Barry. This is this round stone which has a point which was invented 1 million years ago, 1.5 million years ago. It is the sign, the first tool that was ever found, and that is needed, that shows how humans have to, that's this culture, right, to make such a stone, to skin animals and to kill animals.
So I'd like to test out the hypothesis.
Yes.
There are 2 layers of culture. One layer of culture is learned because you need to learn it. So if you're in the Alps, you need to learn to walk in the snow, and you do things like invent snowshoes and so forth. But then there is a second layer of culture where you walk in the snow for fun.
We come to this.
Okay, good.
So Gehlen has many chapters.
We'll come back.
Good. So now that man is a defective being. Now let's look at the world openness.
Well, you should have a pause for questions here, I think.
Yeah, okay. So any questions regarding the defective? So basically in the book, I'm skipping this, there are 200 pages, some of which are now outdated, which have a whole anatomical theory of human deficits and the deficits of physiology. So it's very biological. I'm not showing this material here, partly because it's out there's, for example, super interesting material about why human beings have to be carried around so long. And the reason is that because our brains are so big, we have to be born immature. Because if we would grow more inside the woman couldn't give birth anymore because the birth channel wouldn't allow us to pass through. So therefore we can only stay there for 9 months, so it would be better to stay 18 or 20 months like the elephants do it. And then so we are born immature and have to mature, and that's why we have to be carried around for such a long time, because we are born immature. And that's super interesting. And it is the price that nature has paid for the size of our brain as compared to the size of our body.
How many kids do you have?
5.
So the reason why we have flexible skulls or something like
yes.
that?
Yes. Well, it becomes less flexible after, but during birth, there are very strong shearing forces on the skull, which is deformed several times. So the infant moves through the female pelvis like this. So first the head is like this. So if this is the head, first it's like this, and then it turns, and then it gets out like this. And so during this, enormous forces are acting. The bones of the pelvis put enormous force on the and so the bones. If you have radiographic pictures of how the bones actually change their position in the birth channel, it's quite amazing. And so he has a lot of material to support this, but I because it's not so philosophical, I've skipped it. But in the book, I think he emphasized it so much because this idea was so new. More questions on this? Yes.
I assume Aquinas was using soul, like I guess like animus or anima or something like that in the lab.
Anima, yes.
Yeah. And in this class we used Geist a lot.
Yes.
Sorry for
Very
that.
used Geist.
Yeah.
Very
but
good.
That's
Just
not
to explain why the Germans are so confused.
They are not. Look at me. I'm not confused.
but that's not the same thing as Seele, right?
So there we have, so for him, so this is a good question. So in classical philosophy, there is no distinction between Geist and Seele. There's only anima, and then there's mind and soul in English, and in German Geist and Seele, and basically the classical distinction is that the mind is the mental, what creates our mental state, consciousness and all the other higher elements of the mental state, and the soul has become a theological term. So Kant clearly distinguishes and says the soul is a theological term. It relates to our eternal ability. It is not a philosophical term anymore, right? Though Kant has to use it to justify his ethics. So in the Critique of Practical Reason, he says the eternal soul is needed so that to guarantee the freedom of mind. So he makes a connection between freedom of mind, or freedom of will, and the soul, but it is clearly separated. And then I think the most elaborate philosophy around this problem of mind and soul is given in Scheler's work. What's his name in English? Scheler's main work on ethics. Material ethics and the new... Principle.
Formal and material
Yeah.
ethics is the way the
Yes.
English translation
Yes.
goes, but the German is somewhat different.
The German is...
Formale und materiale Ethik.
Yeah, but it's something like
Actually, I think it's materiale und nicht materiale Ethik.
something like this. But this in his main work, which has a good English translation, you will find excellent description of the difference.
I think Kant uses Gemüt.
No, Gemüt is something else again.
Okay.
So
Something in between. Maybe.
So Gemüt, no, it's not. Gemüt is basically the emotional capability of human.
Mm.
So this is Gemüt is for him part of the mental, but it's a part that it has to do with emotions, right? So your Gemüt allows you to feel pain and happiness and sorrow and so on. Kant doesn't say very much about emotions. Come on, he's a Prussian. Now, being a Prussian means you have to overcome your emotions, but he has a bit of it. but the English tradition is much stronger on emotions. So Hume and even Adam Smith and many others, Barry knows more about this than I do, is much more strong on emotion. And I think that has cultural reasons because German philosophy was mainly done by Prussians and also by Schwaben. Swabians, and so they prefer not to speak about emotions.
You're leaving out the Bavarians, yeah.
But which Bavarian?
We'll come back to the Bavarians later.
You think Scheler was a Bavarian? That's why you say.
Well, he belongs to the Munich school.
Yeah. But he's a Saxon originally. So anyhow. Okay. So let's come to world openness. So world openness of man means that he is not tied into his environment like an animal, but burdened by the ability to freely and actively choose his perceptive field. So man is not fit into nature like animals, which have a perception which matches their habitat. The milieu exact. Milieu extract. So that means that in their habitat, the milieu, they extract only what is relevant for their survival. And that's how their perception works. And there are many, many experiments which prove that, also modern experiments. But man can freely choose his perceptive field and expand it technically. So the technical expansion of the first technical expansion were, of course, magnification glasses, and then later on telescopes and so on. And the capability is not only situated at a higher mental level, but at the basic level of consciousness. So that means that for example, you can turn your attention to mental events, and even you can turn your attention and intentionality to your own fundamental consciousness. So how is my state of consciousness? So when you, for example, are in the middle of falling asleep, you can reflect on this. I think everyone here has done it already, right? So you can, or when you are half awake, you can kind of reflect that you're not half awake and so on. So you can actually even address consciousness and direct your intentionality. Husserl describes this in a wonderful way to everything inside and outside you. And this leads to potential sensory overload, which is a burden, especially for young children. They have to learn how to cope with this capability of directing the attention to everything. And he calls this a sensory surprise field. of unforeseeable structure which man must autonomously experience and filter through. So for the infant, it is situated in a sensory surprise field. Sensorisches Überraschungsfeld. And this surprise field needs to be structured. And if we don't select from the endosensory possibilities, we fail and cannot exist. And there are examples of schizophrenics or post-traumatic stress disorders who really are in this, really have this problem. They can't select and they fail. And the choice among the perceptual possibilities gives man an unburdening and new possibilities to act. So the deburdening or unburdening basically is the result of this choice. And the burden of choice is then turned into an opportunity via selective perception. So when we have selective perception, unlike the animal, which is not selective because it is compulsory, by necessity selective, but it's a result of a free selection process. So you can then have an opportunity. So for example, a craftsman who works with wood has decided that he is dedicating his perception for quite a portion of the day on the wood. Which characteristics does it have? On which direction has it been cut? How is its surface? What happens if I start working on it? Which types of wood? So if I build a classical wardrobe without nails but with this classical technique, which types of woods can I combine? And all of this. So and the philosopher has chosen to direct his perception on something totally different. And then you have among the philosophers some who do only logic, and they have chosen this. So you have a huge opportunity to the selection. And in the childhood, we learn how to choose from the huge field of possible sensory experience. And later, the world openness leads to abstract thinking and the ability to form universals for individuals and to produce propositional thoughts, which I think happens at 4 years. Starts right at age of 4, and this choice is made, as we will see a bit later, in the evolution of our sensory motor capability.
So there is a school of thought which is sometimes called infant metaphysics.
Yes.
And they do experiments on babies and young children to find out when these particular kinds of abilities, for instance, the ability to recognize causality, to recognize continuous existence when objects move behind a screen and then become visible once again. Did Gehlen anticipate that?
Yes, a lot of this. So and we cite this in our book. We cite this modern 60s, 70s research.
Yeah.
But Gehlen anticipated and gives a lot of examples of this. So he, without having the experiment, he described from his observation of children.
Yeah.
He described a lot of this. And so there are, I think, 80 pages of the book only describe how small children acquire these capabilities. So and this is, we will get to see a bit of this now. So when first of all, the first way of children to interact with their environment is still quite instinctive. It's a drinking from the female breast. It's completely instinctive behavior. And then very soon they start to take, when they can take objects, this is 6 to 9 months, something like this, they always put them in their mouth. So first the mouth is the primary sensory organ. And so they take them in their mouth, taste and smell them, and then they a few months later they stop putting them in their mouth, or do it less and less. So even the 3-year-olds still, when you buy toys like Playmobil or Lego, there's always this warning, good morning, that you shouldn't, that there's a risk of choking. And that's because the children still at the age of 3 and 4 years still sometimes put them in their mouth to test them. But as soon as they can stand up, they don't do this so much anymore, but they use the hands to test the objects. Because now the hands are free, because when they crawl, the hands and arms are utilized for movement. So they can't yet use them so much for tactile exploration of the environment. But at age 10 to 14 months, they stand up by dragging themselves up on furniture or something that they use for this, and then they start, the hands get freed. This is such a fantastic moment. So if you have children, you have to watch this when this happens, because you can really see how man became man. Because the monkey is walking on 4 feet most of the time. He sometimes gets up. But when the child gets up and starts standing, you see an immediate change in the utilization of the hands. they are suddenly free. It's fascinating, and this is the Menschwerdung, the ontogenesis of man that you can observe in the child. And it's even, if you look at the embryo and the fetus, you see many stages of the embryo look like animal stages, right? So in embryology, you also see this, that how, so to speak, that millions of years pass in a couple of weeks, so to speak, when the morphology becomes more and more humaniform very quickly. But at the beginning, it looks like a chicken. And I think this you have then again when the child is 10, 12, 14 months old, that you see suddenly what happened 4 million years ago when our ancestors started to descend from the trees and walk on 2 feet. And so then the child then actively associates the object with abstractions and slowly learns how to classify objects by visual inspection. This is where Gehlen anticipates this whole school of infant metaphysics in these passages. That's page 150 to 200 of the book, approximately. So the animal emotions are predefined. So the horse can walk right after birth. Humans have to learn how to use their unlimited arsenal of motoric possibilities. So this is really interesting. So playing the violin is really different from using a pencil to write a mathematical equation, right? And so the motoric possibilities are actually maneuvering a tank, you know. And so the arsenal of motoric possibilities is almost unlimited, and humans have to make choices which one to learn. And man is forced to go through this experience because of his unspecialized instinctual nature and the world openness. So therefore, man has to go through this in the first years of his existence. Man has to go through this experience, learn to make the choices. And interestingly, the choices made very early on are then pursued also in life. So when you look at children, what they make choices in the first 5 years, you can almost anticipate who becomes a scientist or an intellectual, and who becomes an artisan and so on. It's very interesting. And through what humans do, they play through the motoric combinations. So playing means when children play, they train motoric combinations. And Gehlen calls this motoric imaginations. Imagination, so for him, imagination is a core term. So humans have imagination, no other entity has imagination. So imagination means the ability to detach oneself from the actual world and to depict an alternative. And so when the violin, how to play the violin was, so when the first chord instruments were made, they were only, how do you call this, Zupfen?
Plucking.
They were only plucked. And later on the bow was invented, and then the motions were invented. All these came from motoric imagination. So somebody plucked, and you thought, well, actually maybe I could also, get this string to do something else if I touch it in a different way. And maybe you had caressed something and produced a sound by caressing it. Like you can caress with saliva, you can caress a bottle and get a sound out of the bottle. He somehow thought maybe I can get sound from the string another way, and then the bow was invented. Then motions of the bow were invented until we have modern violin, which is incredible. And so if just to listen to Bach's solo compositions for violin and cello, the cello sonatas, it's incredible what the human mind can do, and this all has to do with motoric imaginations that can invent new motion patterns depending on past experience and intention. So usually the past experience are used, are remembered, and then something new is added with imagination. And so to cope with the totally open world which man faces, he needs controlled movement variants to cope with the freely experienced environment. Variants which we learn by imitation and experience. So because we see our environment as totally open, full of possibilities, we need to train ourselves the way we move, where the animals just perform the programmed behavior. And so the burden of the open environment is transformed into the ability to act by the sensory motorical experience we gain. And man works himself to insight and cognition. And actually, I don't like Marx very much, but Marx was the first to see this. In his very early works, the Frühschriften, one of them are the thesis about Feuerbach, which I don't like, but he has, in his early works, he has already seen that work is a mode of cognition. And then chapter 6 of Das Kapital, Band 1, so the first word of the Capital, chapter 6 contains also an account of work as a means of cognition, which is, I think, his best text. Oh, his only really good text. Oh no, there's another passage in first volume and third volume of Capital, where he says that capitalism necessarily leads to monopoly formation, which is also true, right? Which we can now observe everywhere. So, but all the rest is crap. You know, his whole theory of socialism and also even the Mehrwert theory, the theory of value creation, is completely wrong, because he only sees exploitation. It's just economic nonsense. But he was one of the first philosophers to see this. So, and this working to insight and cognition happens in the small children. The small children form the first universals that they have, like the Lego stone, right? So there's an age when they can see 2 yellow Lego stones as equivalent. And later, when they're 4 years old, they discuss that, look, I need this yellow stone.
A block, you said.
The yellow block, because my house I'm building is only made of green and yellow blocks. But here's an orange one that's almost like the yellow one, it fits into your house. So you hear these discussions among them. Then they are fully in categorical thinking and equivalent and non-equivalent, and then they are full of metaphysics, and they obtain this by this motor action, you know. And then they learn all of this, and it's super fascinating, and Gehlen gives a very deep account of this. Which actually before Marx, in Kant, there's nothing about Hegel or Schelling, nothing about cognition and work. They didn't see it. For them it was all, you know, they only saw the higher cognition, didn't look at children, they only saw the higher result of the cognition, so to speak, and then thought that this is what they need to talk about. But Marx was the first to see the role of work, and that was of course because he was concerned with the worker. But it was great that the side effect was that he learned something important, and he's funny. He also speaks in chapter 6 of Reproduktionsarbeit, work of reproduction, which is really so German, and you can only it's not supposed to be comical, it's serious. It's the only Germans can do that. It's very good. So now you see here you have this the motion of human is characterized by a sophisticated sense for the exterior and also self-attention. So the self-attention is super important, you know. Because basically when you have fine motorics, like this small girl, she's maybe 3, she's actually trying to do something, I think, with fine motorics, and whenever you move, you also get sensory feedback. Because when I touch this bottle and squeeze it, I also feel something, and that creates a loop. And this loop was first observed by Charles Sanders Peirce. He was the first to see that there's a sensory motor loop, and that this loop enables the tuning of the movements. And the effects of the motions are perceived and regulate the motion itself. So when I drink from this bottle and I want to have more, I can squeeze it or suck more on it, and both of these movements are of course determined by the amount of water that I get out of the bottle and so on. And this is the basis of the development of motoric imagination. I think the term motoric imagination is so great, because usually when you think of imagination, you think of, oh, I imagine to meet a friend, I imagine a good meal, I imagine a trip. No, but the most fundamental imagination form is motoric imagination. And so motoric imagination can, with this we can invent new ways to move, like swimming was invented, right? Human beings couldn't swim. Sometimes it was invented by someone, and then it became a culture. Or if you think of water, a raft, when humans built the first raft, they had to learn how to steer. Steering a raft is a movement, it's invented, right? It's not programmed. Nobody has ever steered a raft before the first raft was invented. So then you invent such patterns, and we are full of all the sports we perform are such invented motion patterns. And a good sportsman who is excellent at baseball, I think a very boring sport, by the way, but ice hockey is good. and all of the motions there are really have to be learned. And even if I don't like baseball, I'm absolutely impressed by the way that these people learn the motions and perfectionate them. They devote essentially 20 years of their life to this, right? I mean, all violinists and so on. And so these motion fantasies, this interaction with the environment then populates our inner mental world of motion fantasies and also success and perception expectations. So I can expect now if I take the bottle that it will yield to my grip if I squeeze a bit, you know, and also success that I can achieve, that if I have a bottle of wine and a bottle of this what is it called, this tool to open it, bottle opener, I don't know. I can open it and so on. And this can then be built independently of the actual experience. So once there is not enough experience material, this is the source of inventions. Technical inventions are based on motor imaginations, which use the material that has been obtained by earlier experience. And if you look at how a mathematician works, so he has now an experience with mathematical entities, he recombines them, writes them down, and it's also a type of motor experience. And you can also see this as a very, very sophisticated form of imagination. So basically, the man creates an action space for himself for which a rich repertoire of motoric patterns is available via hands and speech. Now we come back to Thomas of Aquinas' idea of hand and speech. So man creates his own space, removes himself from the pressure of the immediate impression and experience, right? So you can, as a human being, and that's what you do when you do philosophy or higher culture, you are not anymore under the pressure of the immediate impression and experience, but you have this free space of which is completely freed of urge and urge fulfillment, which is not the case in animals. And in this is an overseeable space full of interpretable signs, and it's prepared, the human prepares himself, this space for intervention and behavior composed of motoric acts. And if you look at how humans do this, they do this with their hands and language. So the hands and the language are really the two tools by which we are basically interacting with this space. And each human being, each individual has developed these motions by his own experience, right? And imitation and interaction with other humans, but every human being has gone through this. So in every human being there's this rich skill set that is obtained and can be utilized in situations where it's adequate. So this is very important, so that every human being is not the carrier of a genetic program that enables emotions, but the carrier of a program that is learned, through which the human being goes himself. And if you look at an Eskimo child, it really learns totally different motions from my children, which were growing up in a world of books, right? And so I remember when they started playing, they often played that they read. They were holding the books in the wrong direction and so on. But because they saw that I was doing this most of the day, they wanted to imitate this, you know. And so an Eskimo child, of course, plays that it's hunting or fishing or something, or building a house of snow where an igloo. And so depending on the culture, totally different motion patterns are learned. And what I found very funny is that I underline a lot with the pencil when I read books. And the children, they played underlining. So because they saw this behavioral pattern of me, and I found it very interesting. So Katja said, look, they're underlining again. Sie unterstreichen wieder. Which I found my wife Katja, very fun. And so this is now all the hands, right? And there are these feedback loops that you can take an object and feel its properties and then adapt your behavior to it and so on. And all the fine motorics, so actually that's an important side remark. Why are there still humans in a car factory? It's because we can't model the sensory motor fine-tuning of motion. And so whenever in the car something has to be put in where fine motion is required, it can't be done by the machine. Because we don't have mathematical models for the sensory motor action. And we've tried now for decades, but what happens is so complicated that we don't have ways to replicate it. Which I find, and so there's now a robot system called Da Vinci or Leonardo, that is used quite a lot in university hospitals, but it can only do the steps that are non-fine motorical. And then again, for the fine motorical steps, the human being surgeon needs to come. He's there all the time, but yes.
We should have the coffee break.
Oh, sorry, then I finish the page and then we have the coffee break. So, now language, and Gehlen has 100 pages on language, is a special motoric capability which is developed in the context of the acquisition of the motion repertoire. So when we learn to move, we also learn to speak. But it's also a type of motion. And it is communicative behavior which consists of the use of self-perceived symbols. It's the highest form of deburdening from the huge manifold of sensory input and possibilities to act. So the burden is this huge possibility of world openness, and language deburdens us in the highest possible form. And when we speak, we hear ourselves speaking. And so therefore, it is like when I touch this, I feel that I touch it, and when I speak, I hear myself. And Gehlen then describes when children make the first sounds, they hear the sounds, and you can actually, when you are with children and you start to making sounds, you can hear how they tune them, not crying, but like when they start to use vowels, that's the first thing they do, you can hear how they repeat the vowel, how they tune themselves to the vowels, and how this way they learn to speak. It's like this cycle of motoric action with the hands, but now with language. It's fascinating. And so this then enables a symbol-based view of the world, which is self-created by our species in specific interaction with the world. And this makes the world available to our actions, because we can then have universals, and that can only is bound to language.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did Gehlen know so much about children?
Yeah, he was totally. Because he realized that they are models of evolution, and he realized this from embryology. So my one of the Hochstädters was one of the pupils of the inventor of embryology. Oh, I think I told you once in Dorpat, which is more east, the last German university before St. Petersburg, and there he was. Embryology was invented in 1850, and one of my ancestors was a PhD student there, and it also invented the Hochstädter Zellen and so on. He was the first, and so embryology, when Gehlen studied, was already quite advanced, and so he saw this that there are these evolutionary patterns in embryos, and then he also saw it in children. I think it's a great insight.
So just wait for everyone to come and sit down.
Actually, I have only one talent. It's analytical thinking. I just apply it to any field I want.
Well, you can't just use analytic thinking if you want to cure patients with psychiatric disease.
Yeah, but that's
Or
true.
even diagnose.
No, that's true. But I didn't do this very long because I found it too boring. But yes, that's true.
I think this is probably the first time in America that in a philosophy department the book by Gehlen is being discussed in detail. But I think he's known among sociologists or social anthropologists.
Yes,
But they published the translation.
Yes, but that's why the translation is poor. Yeah, because for example there are quotes of Schelling in it, and I looked at the translation. It's actually as if a Chinese migrant worker would translate Schelling. I mean, it's so terrible. And I mean to be able to translate Schelling, that's hard. You need, if you had to, you could, but you would have to take some time. And but the sociologists can't. it's so arcane. Schelling was a German idealist, like Fichte and Hegel. I think he's the most digestible of the three. And he was full of.
We're waiting for a couple more people, but we can make this decision without them. So I only set aside half an hour for lunch. And there are lunch places where you can buy food and bring it back.
But I need more, Barry.
That's a good point. How long do you need?
I want to go to the hotel and take a quick nap because I'm so jet lagged. So I would be grateful for a good hour.
Okay, so I will. So we have two options. I can move the lunch break to an hour, or I can move it to 90 minutes. If we make it 90 minutes, we will all be relaxed for lunch, but we will have to finish a bit later. Probably before the schedule says, but still later than others.
I would prefer 90 minutes, but I promise that then my performance will be much better. If I go, I need to take a nap.
Shall I put 90 minutes?
I would appreciate a little bit of break as well.
I'll put 90 minutes in that.
Thank you, Barry.
Thank you.
And I guess you can start talking again when you like.
Okay, so this is very condensed of a lot of pages. Let me see what I have on the next page. If it gives more details. Yeah, I think I will talk a bit more about it before I move on to the next slide. So the great thing about language is that first the child has to take objects into its mouth to get acquainted with them. Then it touches them. And then language allows to interact with reality without touching. And this is why it is such a massive form of unburdening, because you can now talk about reality without affecting or changing it. Animals can't do that. Animals always have to directly interact with reality, but humans can talk about it, and then they can basically plan and socialize via language. And all of this is possible because language is, so what Gehlen points at is that language is in principle similar to touching, but much more detached and abstract, and therefore much more powerful. But it comes from the same origin. And it makes the world available to our actions in many senses, so we can consider our past actions and whether they were successful or not, whether we should change them or repeat them. We can decide and plan for the future. We can, as a group, plan the future and then say who does what, split the work, and all of this. So this is a super way of deburdening, in the sense that we can not only select the input, but we can also abstract it, go to a higher level, and then have a very economical way of speaking about things. Language is also very much about communication economy.
So can I just make the point about a certain phrase you have here?
Yeah.
It is communicative behavior which consists of the usage of self-perceived symbols.
Yes.
Now, I appreciate that when we're learning language, the self-perception, that means the perception by the speaker of the speech output is important. But I would say that for mature humans, the uses of language are almost self-perception free.
Yeah, well, it's not completely true, because it becomes subconscious again.
Yeah,
but you regulate, of course, in the way now I'm talking to you and the way you react to me. Let's modulate the way I speak, but it's becoming subconscious again. So that's what Scheler calls automatic behavior. So a lot of this cycle becomes subconscious and automated, but it's still there, and you can hear this from phrases like, "Have you heard yourself talking, my dear?" Yeah, I don't know whether this translates well into English, but in German it's a phrase, hör dich mal selber zu, hast du dich selbst sprechen gehört. So this means that it's a call of moving the now automated unconscious cycle of self-perception up to the conscious level anymore, to reflect oneself and correct oneself. Because if you say to someone, "Have you heard yourself speaking?" it's mostly criticism. And it asks the speaker to more reflect on what he's doing and how he's acting. And but you're right, it becomes automated.
And there's another point here, which is that it's a point made by Kleist in his piece on the continual completion or creation of thoughts through speech.
One of the best texts ever written in the history of mankind, by the way. I think it's one of my absolutely favorite texts.
So, and the short version of the title is, "I don't know what I think until I hear what I say."
So the example he uses is Mirabeau. So that's the parliament, the assembly. You know, the king after the Bastille fell, the king assembled the three Stände, how do you call them?
Estates.
The three estates. And then Mirabeau, who was a nobleman, spoke on behalf of the bourgeois association. And he was getting up and didn't know what to say really. And because the protocols are fully available, Kleist uses the protocol to explain how Mirabeau made up his mind of what he was going to say while he was speaking. Then he starts, "Dear King and dear citizens, I would like to emphasize," and then he kind of gets into his, and this is the example he uses, and it's true. And he first of all, and then Kleist comments, and then he really said citizens, and then he realized that he had said citizens, so he had made a point that that they are not subalternate to the king anymore. And then this gave him new self-confidence, and then he said the following, and so Kleist analyzed the dynamics of the self-perception. It's one of the best texts ever written. And I had, when I was studying, when I was a student, I was teaching PhD students of law who came from Italy and France, who had to write their PhD in German. And I always use this text at the end of when I had finished them after 1 year, they had to discuss this text with me because it's so hard to read. It's so difficult. It's a wonderful text. So we already said that language is a self-perceived motion. The sound we make is a movement that we hear. That's very important. Yeah, if I do this, I hear this movement, but I also hear when I speak. When we utter a sound, we communicate in the sense that we perform an effortless motion intended towards an object. So in the simplest case, a child is saying apple because it wants to have the apple and eat it. So apple, apple, it says, it points at the apple, it says apple, apple. And we experience our symbolic intention towards the object at the same time by hearing us say it. And this is and when you notice this when you say to a waiter, can you come to my table, and the waiter doesn't react, and you are really hungry, or you need to leave soon, or you want to pay. Then you actually repeat it, you become louder, and then when you actually utter intentions, speech acts, and nobody reacts, then the automation stops, and you realize what's going on. And this is, of course, the foundation of propositional thinking. The child uses now universal, and the way children use universals are great. So they say they call an airplane fly, for example, because they see it's far up in the sky. It is as small as a fly. It's flying. So they say, look at the fly, and so on. So the universals are, when they start to use universals, it's fascinating. But this is the foundation of propositional thinking, because propositional thinking needs universals, in my opinion. So there is no propositional thinking. So this is what people who think they are only individuals, the nominalists, right? I think it's so insane because they couldn't even speak without universals. They don't realize this. But they use the word apple all the time. But apple is universal. It's not called apple 137/7b/c. So it's not how does Werner call them?
Referent tracking.
It's not a referent tracking object, but it's actually universal. So they use universals themselves all the time. And so with language we can create a sphere of symbols that we can combine in an arbitrary fashion detached from the physical reality. And now we have a highly creative manner of communication that enriches the natural world via culture, which we create. So now we have language, and now even if we look at a primitive nomadic society of 40 cave dwellers, 40,000 BC, they have a huge culture. They have rituals for burying the dead, they have birth rituals, they have sophisticated dances, totemism. I mean, they have a superb secondary theory of how nature, their relation to nature is. And all of this is a very high culture. They make paintings on the walls of the caves. They really, they create a world of themselves. All this is then based on language. And so it is the motion pattern with the highest degree of unburdening that we have, while, for example, breathing and drinking are burdened with necessity, right? So when you're really, really thirsty, or when you are diving, you have to come up to breathe. It's a necessity, otherwise you die. And the same is for drinking and then so on. But so they are really burdened, but in speech we can be totally unburdened, and that is why speech is so dangerous. Why do we have a renaissance of censorship in the West? Because free speech is so powerful. It's super powerful, and it can erode and undermine structures of rule and of power, and therefore we now see, because the ruling situation we now have in the West is brittle, we need censorship again. And this shows you how powerful language is. Whenever there's censorship in speech regulation, then good morning, then you know that something is done, that you can, first of all, that there's with the power system of society, when that is needed. But what more important, you see what power language has, right? Otherwise the rulers wouldn't make such a big effort to regulate it and reduce its scope. So language gives us symbols that allow a superb mastery of the perceived world, external and mental. All the texts that we produce are expressions of the mastery of the mental, right? So this example of Gleiss text is of course one of the best, but all the texts are like this. And so, but it's always a sensory motor activity. And so this is a very high level structure of another 100 pages of the book. So what are the properties of language summarized? So first of all, it enables us to compress the non-visible distance symbolically and make it overseeable. So that means with touching, I can only manage what directly surrounds me, and pointing is the next level. I can already go bit further. But language, of course, is a motor activity that which scope extends to the non-visible.
So
now
what do you mean by invisible?
Non. It's an N is missing. It's a typo. I was typing in the plane, thinking about turbulences.
Invisible.
Yeah. No, but when I use the pattern with the hyphen, it's because I want to translate the bulky German words. Nicht sichtbar, he says. So he doesn't say unsichtbar, which is invisible, but nicht sichtbar. And so I use often the hyphens to express it, because German is so bulky, because they have these capability to concatenate nouns, right? So in English you can't do it anyhow. And so the non-visible distance is it even extends beyond pointing to the really non-visible distance. And overseeable, he means that now we oversee mentally. We have now, like, for example, I have a picture in my head of the United States, right, of the East and the West Coast and the Middle and the South, and now mentally I can oversee the United States entirely. Of course, it's very superficial, but it's not so wrong that in the South you have more Spanish speakers, and that the Spanish speakers in Florida are very different from those in the Southwest, and that in Maine there are almost none, and so on, and that you have a certain view of America. That's the oversight that is obtained by language and abstraction. Second point, the language is a behavior that allows us to leave its objects untouched, to communicate without altering the physical. And so this is very important, because before language there's always only physical interaction. So if you don't have language and want to explain something to somebody, you need to take the object. Like when you show a child, of course mothers speak to children from their birth on, which is also it's almost an instinctive behavior of women, anyhow of humans, to speak to children who are just newborns. But you also, when you interact with a child that cannot speak yet, you very often show it what to do with the object. And so you show how you yourself take a spoon and show to the child how to do this, how to eat from the spoon, for example, or how to drink from a bottle and so on, or from a cup. Actually, that's the hard part, because at the beginning they always put the whole content of the cup over the stuff. And so you explain, you talk with the children that don't get it yet, but they see it, the gestures. But language then allows you to communicate without doing this. You cannot alter the physical anymore. And this is of course the basis of theoretical thinking, which animals don't have. Now what basically he says, that there is a layer of perception and action, and for animals there's nothing between. They perceive and they immediately act. Like there's the orange I described, and the apple takes the orange and it wants to eat it. Humans have now a layer inserted between the perception and action that allows a non-object altering planning. So for example, the Stern-Gerlach apparatus, which was basically the invention to prove the invention that led to the full form, that without it there wouldn't be the Schrödinger equation. So this was built by Stern-Gerlach in 1922, and it led to the discovery. It led to the 3 years later, to the Schrödinger equation. And of course, to build this, they made a super sophisticated plan. They were on the whiteboard, it was a chalkboard, and writing equations, and then drawing pictures of the magnets, and how they should structure the magnets, and debating how it should be done. Then they built the first thing, it didn't work, and so on. Actually, when they had the functioning apparatus, they still thought it was broken, because the experimental result was so astonishing. And so this is, of course, only possible with language. And then the third point is that all sound movement elements can be utilized and performed independently of the presence of objects. So this is very important. So animals can't do this. So animals, when they do sounds, they make sounds. These sounds always is warning of a predator, indicating the presence of food, mating, communicating to the children calling their parents. It's always physical presence. It's always within the habitat. But humans can, of course, use all this independently of the presence of objects. Now there are symbols representing reality, and external or mental. And I think that the ability that we have symbols for mental entities is super important. Like without it, we wouldn't have mathematics. And now by language we obtain an overview of the past. So we can always think of the past, and if you think, which is very interesting, of the past, if you think from the Gemüt, from the emotions, you think in pictures and feelings, but you can of course think of the past with propositional thinking. And you can systematically render your biography, what you learned at college, and so on. And so this is an overview of the past, but you can also imagine the future, and the absent and unreal. And so the imagination is a key term in Gehlen, as I said. And so you can imagine now how your future would look like. You can depict it, you can think of it in terms of images, but also in terms of propositions. You can draw plans and models of the future, like you want to build a house, you make an architectural model, and so on.
But you can do this also for the life after death.
Yeah, and so on. And then the absent and the unreal, of course, this is the root of fiction, that you can imagine something that's unreal, but it's very pleasant or interesting, and so on. And if man would live in the present like an animal, he could not survive because his physical properties are too weak to survive. That's very important. The man needs to create a cultural environment in which to survive, and language enables this. And planning and predicting depend on language. So, and also, man can make his own behavior the object of language. That's the source of sociality and the ability to form communities and societies. So basically, now I can say, I can describe my own behavior or rules of behavior and consider them with others, and then agree on joint behavior, and that is the ability to form communities and societies in the human way. So with language, man can abstract from his own mental state and enter into intersubjectivity to act from the perspective of the mental state of the other shared with him. That's the thought that is very strongly in not Peirce and James, but the other one, the sociological, I mentioned at the beginning, Barry. What's his name again? Sorry for this, I need to go back. Was this so important? Herbert Mead, George Herbert Mead. So this he takes a lot from Mead. Mead's version of intersubjectivity. Gehlen uses a lot and cites a lot. That basically, because of language, now we can abstract from our own mental state. And intersubjectivity means imagining what the other thinks and feels and means. And so then we can act from the perspective of the mental state of the other. And this of course is the total foundation of sociality, right? So sociality has intersubjectivity is one, socialization the other, and socialization means in the end the ability to follow social norms. But socialization is all about learning social norms of behavior. And so, but the basic of this intersubjectivity, and there is of course a non-verbal intersubjectivity that you find between mother and child, or between lovers and so on, who touch and kiss, and embrace. You have this. The handshake is also a form of lightweight intersubjectivity. But the deep intersubjectivity requires more than that. It requires eye contact. It requires touch, but it requires language, and language is so crucial for it. And these are the main functions of language. And and basically, Gehlen has looked at if you look at all these possibilities that language offers. And he, of course, also has already the notion of the speech act. I mean, he didn't invent it, but it is very central in that language is a way of acting. And I think he quotes Schopenhauer on this. But of course, the first one was an Englishman.
Thomas Reid.
Yeah, Thomas Reid.
He was a Scotsman.
A Scotsman.
What is in?
Yeah, okay. Britain, from my perspective.
Brit.
And so if you look at this is why it is for him the highest language, the highest form of unburdening or deburdening. And it's a unique sensory motor structure which achieves an unburdening and makes the dangerous world openness of man productive for planning and social action. That's a high-level summary, right? So we with the world openness and defective anatomy we are endangered. Our survival is all the time endangered. But language is then this ultimate type of unburdening that lets us plan and do social action. And social action is, of course, in the end, what makes human beings superior in their ability to conquer the world than any other animals. Okay, So any questions? So this is I'm a bit sorry because in the book Scheler has 5 roots of language. He has a very rich theory of the genesis of the ability to speak. I can't present this today. It would be so I could do a full semester about this book. Probably if I would do this, I would use the second big monography or monograph, which is Primordial Man and Industrial Culture, and I would combine the two. But I don't have the time today. But it's just a summary. But do you have any questions on this?
So when I talked about planning the life after death, I was leaving it open to say that that is the point where religion enters into human history.
Yeah, I mean, religion enters into human culture by asking about why do we die, and so this is what there's a very famous paper by Rudolf Bultmann, one of the greatest theologians of all time. He's, I think, on one level with the two biggest are of course Paul and Luther, of either Lutheran, I have to say it. And number 3 is Bultmann, and he says that welchen Sinn hat es von Gott zu reden? Which sense does it have to talk of God? And he said the certainty of our death. So once we are certain that we have to die, then we get to the religious question. And Schleiermacher also says this, right? Another great German-speaking theologian. And I think this is true, so you're totally right. It's not only about is there life after death, but first of all, why do we have to die? I think that drives religious thinking.
Can you give us a quotation, a reference on Bultmann?
In English translation?
Oh, yeah, even in German, I will look it up.
Yeah, I think so. There's a book. I think you must have it. I don't have a whiteboard here, but on which I could write. But his name is.
If you raise the projector.
No, I will do it in a different way.
Okay.
I will just. So, this is how he's spelled. And I think there's a volume of selected papers by him translated into English. Why it is so interesting to read him is because this school is now not so much utilized anymore, but he was writing during when the general theory of relativity and quantum mechanics were invented as a theologian. And he was a Kantian in a way that he said he was a rationalist, and he said how as a rationalist and looking at quantum physics and the general theory of relativity, if you take this seriously, how can a modern man still believe in the eternal life, in the resurrection of Christ? This is not compatible, of course, with physics. So what is becoming of theology in the age of reason? And how can we? And it was a question with which Kant struggled a lot. If you read the Critique of Practical Reason, you find it's a book that is about this struggle. That Kant was a Prussian Protestant and Lutheran, but he wanted to be a rationalist. And the Critique of Practical Reason struggles with this contradiction. And then in the metaphysics, I don't know how it's called, Metaphysics der Sittenberge, how is it translated?
Metaphysics of Ethics.
Yeah, Metaphysics of Ethics, which is a poor translation. The first part is about political philosophy, and there Kant discards God. And he says that we have to have the natural law without God, and the natural law is derived from the autonomy of the human. And so, but this is of course unsatisfying because in the Critique of Practical Reason he derives the autonomy from the existence of God. And so, but then he makes us believe in the Metaphysics of Ethics that we don't need God anymore. So you can see the inner struggles, and Bultmann is so fascinating and great, just to answer your question, because he provides a way for the rationalist Christian, for the Christian who also believes in rationalism and physics, to still be a Christian. And it's super interesting. And it was when I was 15, I was struggling, why should I still believe in God in the age of reason and physics and so on. Then my father gave me papers by Bultmann, and that convinced me actually. So it's really very, very, he's a very great thinker, but it's also quite an abstract, so the typical Catholic hates this, because nothing of what Catholics find cozy about religion is left. It's a super sober and abstract form of religiosity. Okay, can I delete this again?
Yeah.
So yeah, so I think if you read this, if you look into the book by Gehlen and read the passages about language, some of it is now outdated. But if Austin or Searle would have read this, it would have been so much better for them. Because there's so much insight that the analytical philosophy tradition then produced in decades that was already there. I think it anticipates 70% of what they did. And it's a shame that they never looked into it, you know. But this is a problem of this America, you know.
Well, Austin was busy fighting the Germans.
Yeah, but he didn't know Scheler, Gehlen, I'm certain. I think. I mean, it's always good.
No one knew Gehlen, that's for sure.
I mean, it's certainly good to fight Heidegger. I agree with that, but it's not a good idea to ignore this, you know, because so I think some of this is now refined, but it's very interesting if you read the classical text of analytical philosophy and compare this, how much overlap there is and how much further Gehlen went because of his knowledge of the philosophical tradition that they lack. Okay, so let's go to the next chapter about needs and drivenness. So this is super interesting also. This is also, if we go back to the overview slides, the beginning, we have here that we have now covered animals, the man is a defective being, the world openness, the sensory overload, the sensory motor function, language, and now we come to drivenness and the mental properties of man. So no, this is the next chapter. Yes. So we have learned that while the animal lives in the present and is bound by its instincts and the pressure of its perception, man is freed and unburdened from the present. So this is very interesting because theologians always say, so Christ says we have to live in the present. But anthropologically, man doesn't live very much in the present. Man looks, as Heidegger says, with what is Sorge? Concern?
Care.
Yeah, but it's not the right.
That's the word they use.
Yeah, it's wrong. So it's a mixture of care and concern. I would translate Sorge with care/concern, and this is how it is this. How man looks into the future, and he's unburdened from the present. And language requires a precise memory and enables reliable combinatorial planning and commutation without which man would not survive. Man cannot solve his problems as individual and is always bound to act in a social context. We know this. Which structure do the needs and drivers of such a being have? So this is now super. So this is a summary of what we learned. And now it comes, which structure do the needs and drivers of such a being have to be? So, and now Gehlen says there's a necessity that the needs and drivers urge that being to act, to seek insight and cognition as well as prediction. So he says that basically due to the way that human beings are tasked by nature, due to what they have to do to survive, that they have to develop language and tools and so on, they are driven, they have a drive that urges us to act like this.
So can I just introduce another dimension which you've rather neglected, I suspect, because Gehlen neglected this dimension. So you say language requires a precise memory and enables reliable combinatorial planning. Now, in my experience, most human beings are lazy. And they don't do anything precisely, and they don't do any kind of combinatorial planning. So what you're talking about here is not man in general.
I disagree. It's not. I'm not. So now this is about really the non-scientific man. So think of a match of what's the football team called here?
Bills.
The Bills. So now families are planning to go to a Bills game. So now they want to do tailgating. Is it called like this?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And they plan this. They have to buy beer and sausages and mobile barbecue or what. I've never been at tailgate, but I imagine it like this, and so on. And then they have to.
You're doing a great job.
Yeah, and so on, and so and then on the other hand, the stadium people have to plan all the security measures the players, the doctor comes and checks the players once more. It's a superb act of collective planning. And actually, when the game is on, how many people fit into the build stadium? 30,000? Something like this?
Sounds right.
Yeah.
More?
So many people are assembled there. It's usually peaceful. It's a great social event. Deals are brokered. You know, grossist sells something to somebody there, meets his pals. I mean, it is incredible. So there's a lot of planning there. And it's not about rational planning. It's about this, you know, vegetative planning. You know? So here he's not talking about what we do when we prepare a scientific experiment, but about really the everyday. You know, so, and if you want to prepare for tailgating, you think, oh, last time these sausages we bought there, they were really disgusting, and so we have to go to another shop, and I heard from my aunt that they are really great over there, and so on. So you have to use your memory all the time to do this. So I think that that's what he means here. He means the everyday, basic memory and reliable combinatorial planning, right? So the details. So, do we still have coals for the barbecue? When is the shop closing? I mean, there's so much that you don't think about that you are taking into account to plan for this build scale, you know. And so this is certainly not a meeting of quantum physicists, right? and still, you know. And so I think that this is what he means here. We will get back to this irrational part. I have one slide at the end as to reward you, which I wrote after our discussion in the car. So there is a necessity that the needs and drivers urge the being to act. And now we must so the point is that man must overcome the needs of the actual situation, direct his thinking towards remote long-term goals, Ferninteressen. So this means interests, remote interests. And so this is very important that all of you, everybody who leads a successful life, even if you're only TSA worker at Buffalo Airport, right? You have planned your life, you are doing something, you are waking up, you have to be sober at work, so at the evening you cannot have too much beer, and so on and so on. All of this, you have long-term goals that you pursue so that you can perform this. And that is true from TSA worker up to high-level top intellectual like Barry. So I mean, not intellectual in the French sense, but I mean mental worker, right? So you must do this. And now the immediate physical needs for survival must be transformed into interests in obtaining the means to fulfill the primary needs, like in tool making, right? So first, Robinson Crusoe, I think he uses a stick to collect fruit. And then he becomes more and more sophisticated and builds, and then he has collected so many fruit that now he can plan that he has time available. I mean, read it again, it's so cool. That he has time again to build the tools and improve his tools. Then he can, later on, he starts to make pottery, he's collecting mud to make pots and so on. And it's wonderful, and this is, of course, you need to overcome, so you need to find a way to fulfill the immediate needs in a reliable way, and then you can get to higher interests. And the highest interest is that then you spend time listening to Bach or hiking, you know, which is so detached from the short-term interest. And so this transformation is possible because man is conscious of his needs, which means that the need structure is vulnerable, which also means that the need structure is vulnerable. So what does it mean? So being conscious of the needs is that we know about our needs, we can reflect about them, we can alter the need structure. And a very good example of suppression of needs is Tycho Brahe. Tycho Brahe was the predecessor of Johannes Copernicus. Johannes Copernicus discovered that the Earth is not stationary before Galilei, right? He was the first, and he was he was working as an associate with Tycho Brahe, and Tycho Brahe had huge data of observations, but he didn't share them with Johannes Copernicus. And then there was a reception with the king, and Tycho Brahe had to go to the restroom. His bladder was full, but he didn't go because he wanted to suppress the urge to do this, to attend the ceremony in full. And he suffered from a bladder rupture. And so he died of it. Because actually bladder rupture, even today, has a lethality of 15%, even with intensive care. because if you have urine in the whole abdominal space, it's very bad. And so this is a sign of how actually control over your needs, over physical needs, can even kill you. So humans have such a high control over their physical needs that they can kill it. I find the Tycho Brahe story superb. And so that actually then freed the documents that he had and the data, and then Kepler could, it was Kepler, yeah, I think Kepler, it was not, Copernicus was the first to do the raw observations, but Kepler worked for Tycho Brahe. And then Kepler could do his work and make his fundamental observations. And this is the example is good because on the one hand, Tycho Brahe was really wanted to understand how the celestial bodies move, right? So that's a very high long-term goal. But at the same time, he was so fanatical in discipline, he wanted to attend the social event that he killed himself by doing so. And so this ability to control our consciously our needs makes the need structure vulnerable. And so therefore you have drug abuse and sexual perversions are very good examples. Because in drug abuse and sexual perversions, basically basic needs are perverted because there is first a realization that they can be used to create pleasure, a conscious realization, and then an overusage of them that is self-damaging. And so this is the only animals cannot have sexual abuse, have not drug abuse or sexual perversion. You can, with a lot of effort, make animals drug addicted, but they would never become drug addicted spontaneously without human intervention. And there is, of course, no sexual perversion in animal. And these are symptoms of this strange way that we can control our needs and drives. And so what we have in human is that primary needs are transformed to higher meta needs, which is enabled by the drivenness and social behavior. Where's the drivenness? I have to. Here it comes later. Okay, it doesn't matter. So the consciousness of the primary needs enables that transformation to higher needs. So we are conscious that we are hungry, but now we don't. I'm a bit hungry now, but I don't eat anything because I want my mouth needs to be free to speak. And the more distance from the primary needs this transformation is, the higher is the level of human culture. So in very primitive societies, you have this transformation is not too elaborate, but if you think of a scientist working, a mathematician working in his desk, at his desk, surrounded by equations and books full of equations, it's a very, very strong transformation of primary needs. Or if you think of an artist painting a painting. And so there is a continuous spectrum from the basic needs like respiration, food, and sex to the higher cultural needs. And man has innate ability to suppress and postpone the physical needs. That's the Tycho Brahe example, of which he died, you know. And human needs and drivers are orientable. So we can now orient this mental experience, enables us to orient this towards meta needs. For example, to build a tool. So animals can't build tools, right? And so when we want to build a tool, we use our imagination, how can we solve the problem. Then we concentrate consciously away from the basic needs, because of course, you know, foraging always works, right? By foraging you can always find food, but if you make tools, you can then do agriculture and get food much easier. And so this is the orientability of human needs, and the structure of human drivenness enables this postponing of primary needs via action. And so now, between the elementary needs like respiration, sex, and hunger and food, and the external fulfillment, we find a system of value orientation and behavior. So now a layer is put again between the primary needs and their fulfillment. And of course, these needs have to be fulfilled via fluctuating circumstances and continuing circumstances. That's, by the way, the main reason I think why the cultural evolution in medieval Europe was so strong in Northern Europe and quite weak in Southern Europe. Because in Southern Europe it was so easy to get food all the time. That's what Mitterrand writes. And in Northern Europe it was much harder to get food, so they had to invent more elaborate technologies for agriculture. So that, for example, they invented the usage of, my English is in everyday words so poor, Roggen und Hafer.
Rye and
oat,
hay.
Oat, rye and oat. So they invented the agricultural pattern to use alternatively rye and oat on the fields, and so the oat was used to feed the horses, and the rye was used to make this dark bread that the northern Europeans eat, you know. And so this was enforced by the climate. So this is what he means with fluctuating and contingent circumstances. And so now there is a whole system of value orientation and behavior that mediates between experience and conscious action, and it is obtained by hand, eye, touching, and language. And this whole system of sensory motor action is now as like a layer between perception and action, and it allows us to shape our needs, and then there's an interdependence of actions and conscious thinking and the own primary needs and drivers. So this he calls hiatus, the gap. So the gap enables highly complex sociality. So gap means that I can now abstract from the basic needs and now plan my actions remote of them, and by distancing from myself from the needs. And even, you know, even somebody who is totally overwhelmed by his needs, like an alcoholic who is not addicted to alcohol, he still has this ability to at least plan how he can get money to buy the alcohol, when he should drink a lot of it and when less. So most alcoholics drink less alcohol during the day and more in the evening, so that they can still function, so that they can still work to get new alcohol and so on. Even if alcohol is overwhelmingly their primary interest, they still have the hiatus, the ability to postpone some of their drives to plan. And the gap enables highly complex sociality. For example, in elaborate sexual engagement behavior, yeah, or scientific activity. So these are two interesting examples. Elaborate sexual engagement behavior is very typical to humans. Animals also have sexual engagement behavior, but it's very rudimentary and stereotypical, and it usually follows a fixed sequence. But in humans, the sexual engagement behavior is can be super complex, right? It can take from the beginning to its fulfillment a year or so. It can be very complicated, and it is because humans are able to put this hiatus between the need and the way they act. And scientific activity is even more extreme, because there is not even the primary need for scientific activity. It comes out of the tool-making position, but it's a superbly abstract way of doing the tool-making stance. And it is all only possible because of the hiatus. And the hiatus, or hiatus, I don't know how to... Hiatus, thank you. I don't know how to pronounce Latin in English, that's one of my weaknesses. Hiatus is only available to man. Animals don't have a hiatus at all.
So I have a meta need, which is to understand how you put these slides together. When you use quotes from Gehlen, do you just copy the English translation?
No, I translate everything myself. I won't use the scrap translation. That's why it took me so long to make the slides. Because I was in the plane yesterday, 8 hours I had only left, and then I had already written some of the parts that were without translation, but then I had to, even business class has not so much space, so I have to hit the book and the computer, and I did all the translations myself.
All right.
And there is this, I mean, you pointed me to the English translation, but I couldn't use it. Also, it's not a perfect translation, because I didn't spend enough time.
Oh, I know.
But I could make it better, but I wanted to finish the talk.
Yeah.
But even from the translation, you can see how sperrig, I don't know how to say this in English, how difficult this language is. It's a very, very complicated philosophical language. Now the hiatus enables what Gehlen calls the astonishing reverse of the need direction. So Umkehr der des Triebempfindens or something. So this is super, der Triebrecht, Umkehr der Triebempfindens, so reverse of need direction. So this is super cool as an insight. So for humans, it is possible to perform activities that are originally meant to fulfill primary needs as symbolic acts without a secondary theory framework, e.g. in religious context. So within a secondary. So for example, you hunt to eat, and that's a primary need, and the knowledge about hunting is what Robin Orton calls primary theory. So primary theory is an instinctive, irrational theory that allows you to deal with the world. And secondary theory is something like particle physics or religion, which is not really related to the physical interaction with the world, but how does the world work? Why do we exist? Why is there thunder? Why is there storm? When does the rain come? And not when it rains, I can collect water or get wet, but that's primary theory. But secondary theory is why does it rain? And by the way, in modern physics, we don't have a good theory of thunder. And we know that it's, but that's a different. And so now you can. This is so fascinating that you can have, for example, cannibals. They eat a piece of the brain or the testicles of their adversaries. So eating, they don't eat to get food. They eat for symbolic reasons to improve. So when they eat the brain, they want to get cleverer, and when they eat testicles, they want to have more. They want to be more masculine. So that's why they do this, and it is. So this is what he calls the reverse of the need direction, because suddenly something that is needed to fulfill the primary need becomes symbolic. I think it's super fascinating, this idea. Christians symbolically eat Christ's body and drink his blood in the sacrament of the Eucharist, right? So that is similar. So the eating and drinking is now highly symbolic, right? It is actually the highest level of symbolism that one can imagine almost. And it is this reverse of need direction. And another form of this phenomenon is ascetic behavior, because now you are basically consciously not eating anymore to get to a higher level. And this can be understood as a high form of need control, as a continuation of the overcoming of instinctive behavior. So basically when tribal totemist tribes do cannibalism, they actually overcome their instinctive behavior. So basically, and then when they create totemistic artifacts, then they basically create it is a huge cultural step, because now the primary needs are turned into the highest expression of culture. So this shows you already how very, very far away from animals these primitive societies are. If on a scale, on a logarithm, they are they're very, very close to us, whereas animals are super far away. And so the behavioral circle of perception, consideration, action becomes autonomous and can have mental content as the sole source of perception. So this is now what you said already, right? That in this process of need control and sensory motor perfection, the whole action becomes, a lot of it becomes autonomous, and we don't consider it anymore. So we don't consider anymore most of the structure of our day. We just live through it automatically. But now we are freed for higher considerations, like this, giving this talk and discussing these concepts. And then I concentrate only on mental phenomena and don't think about the rest anymore. And therefore, the primary needs need to be suppressed and postponed, and this creates a hiatus, and the hiatus enables then this. And it is, quote, the vital basis of the phenomenon we call soul. And it's already observable in small children. And they already can suppress primary needs to fulfill higher purposes.
So you mean mind?
Yeah, he says this ironically. So it's very...
Well, in German,
Seele. Yeah, but he means it ironically, of course. You know, therefore he says Phänomen, das Phänomen, das wir Seele nennen. So this is I mean, from a British perspective, a super clumsy form of irony. You know, but that's all the Germans can do. I'm sorry. and it's already observed in small children. The suppression of needs enables the usage of its energy. So we have this need, the energy, that is the emotional energy tied to the need. And now, so for example, imagine Tycho Brahe suppressing his need to piss. So from this he gains an energy that he feels elated, he's in the presence of the king, his most sublime intellectual servant, and so on, you know. And so this is a transformation of the energy, and the postponement enables the plasticity and the multitude of higher needs. So now we have higher needs, and all the primary energy that the monkey immediately transforms into action is now put into the higher needs, and they are super plastic. We can think about them. We have a multitude of higher needs. That's why we have, you know, Matthew Passion composed by Bach, Cologne Cathedral, Moby Dick by Herman Melville. All of this is the quantum theory of relativity, quantum physics, and the general theory of relativity. All these cultural achievements are possible because we have these higher needs that come from the hiatus. And the suppression of immediate needs leads to the hiatus, which enables long-term interest. So this is another recapturing of it. So needs can be suppressed and postponed, which opens a hiatus between them and the action. Needs unfold as activities are structured and unfold. Yes. So this means that we can basically that we can structure our needs and then put them into activities. I think the sentence is a bit broke, I'm sorry. They can be combined with images, fantasies, and memories. So now we have higher needs, and these higher needs now lead us to memories, to fantasies, and to images, and all of this creates this rich mental world that we have. And these are, of course, mutable and formable. They can be shaped according to experience and circumstances in interaction with behavior. And all of this is true for very, very simple people. This is not something, Gehlen doesn't describe here a cultural hero. He describes every man. And this is very, I think, Isaiah Berlin, and also, no, I think John Stuart Mill and Isaiah Berlin, both classical liberals, say it, that each individual has a total richness inside of himself or herself, right? And this is what Gehlen here described, because every human being who is not insane or totally mentally handicapped has this incredible richness. And therefore it is wrong to say so the difference between a highly intelligent person and a normal person is very small, because a normal person also has all of this. It's not so well spelled out, he can't write a poem about it, but it's all there.
So does he address the phenomenon of sport?
Yes, sport and play. So he has a chapter about sport and play where he says that sport is of course originally a play, and it is the adult way of playing, and he has a theory about this. And he has a lot to say about sport in the chapters about movement, invention, imagination of movement. He talks about how sports are ways of inventing movement patterns. And I mentioned it a bit earlier.
Yeah, and does he do justice to the fact that the English invented nearly all forms of sport?
I don't remember, but I hope so. It's a very good question why the Germans didn't invent any sports. I think they were busy with music and philosophy probably. but anyhow, this is the formability of this whole multitude of now fantasies of structure, of behavioral structures. And so now in humans there's a continuity between elementary physical needs and conditioned higher interests, and the suppressed needs can yield higher permanent interests which can carry out our intentionality into the future. So like, I want to become a scientist. I'm now 17 or 18, I finished high school. Now I go to college. It's such a long way. And so many dropouts. I mean, even if you make it to the PhD afterwards, to spend your life as a scientist is so unlikely, but you do it. You are in this hexis, this inner state that you want this, and this is a super high level interest. And then you can stay inside this mental sphere in relation to the ever-changing immediate needs. So you every day you read philosophical texts, or if you're a mathematical, you do proofs for years and years and years. But at the same time, all your lower needs are also fulfilled, but you stay on track, and this Freud calls the sublimation. And these permanent interests are the subjective correlates of this is one of the best insights of Gehlen. So he says that these permanent interests are the subjective correlates of objective social institutions, such as law, church, or family. So the church as an institution embodies religious stance, and my faith as an individual is a higher interest that I have distilled from the primitive interests in my formation as an individual via the interaction with the institution. And so this is true for that the fact that I'm a law-abiding citizen most of the time is so to speak the individual correlate of the rule of law and the social norms that are embodied in laws. And so he sees a very clear correlation between the permanent interests and permanent dispositions and habitudes of the individual and the goals, the long-term goals, and the institutions. And therefore he also says that when institutions become brittle and functionless well, individuals start to become shaky on their long-term interests. And you see this in all modern societies. We have a layer of people who are disconnected from the institutions. Like, for example, those nth generation unemployed social welfare receiving families, which are vulgarly called white trash, for example, here in America. We have them in Germany as well. So you have fourth or fifth generation social benefit payment receivers. They don't get up in the morning, they don't wash themselves regularly, they don't go to the dentist. I mean, they don't have all this higher interest, they only eat and watch TV and have sex. You know, and then they become pregnant at age 14 and all this huge, you know, array of problems occurs. And that's because they are out of the socialization cycle where you have this balance between institutional, societal goals and norms and the individual making them his own. They're completely fallen out.
But the benefit payment institution is precisely one of your
Yeah,
social
and but perversely, it creates by doing something that's unphysiological, it creates a modern form of depravity and decadence, which is made possible by this, right? And it is very interesting. This I think this insight into permanent interests, high level interests, long term interests, and societal norms and institutions. And so all needs and interests are themselves again objects of reflection and consideration, and can then be modified, altered, and also abandoned, which is very interesting. Yeah, you can abandon long-term dispositions, which is often painful, but you can do it and can acquire new ones. Like you can divorce, or you can, as a child, say renounce your parents, or you can say I'm not a Christian anymore, I want to become a Muslim, and so on and so on. So they can also be abandoned, which is also an interesting aspect.
What's the German for white trash? You
let me
lead
think.
a too clean life.
What?
You lead a life which is too far removed from white trash.
No,
You
it's
don't
called,
even know what they're
it's called, I would say, verstetigte Unterschicht. But there is no nice colloquial term for it in German. That's because, why do we have white trash in America? Because there's black trash. And so we don't have black trash. Oh, now we have, but only a bit. But because there is no black lower layer of society, this term wasn't developed in Germany. But sorry, this isn't supposed to be racist. It's just a social problem that we have, right? And so because there was no black performing part of society in Germany traditionally, we don't have this term. But we have a verstetigte Unterschicht, which means proletariat. No, it's not even proletariat. It's worse than proletariat. Okay, and now. So man is now oscillating between the flexibility and the shaping of his needs and the necessity to maintain permanent interests that enable sociality. So on the one hand, because of this freedom we have, we can shape our needs, but we also have to have stability. So here on the one hand it is critical that the primary human needs, which are utterly critical for survival, given the deficits of human nature, must be experienced in a world-open manner, enabling their constant sublimation and modification in the face of a variable environment. So all the time we have to make decisions that enable us to survive and to take into account the primary needs. But the cultural formation of the environment that man must perform to survive, the formation, these are as important as the primary drivers. So all intermediate behaviors such as perception, action, and language becomes themselves a need. So now we don't have only the primary needs like eating and drinking, but now we have social needs, which we feel as the same, like meeting people, agreeing with them, paying attention to our parents or talking to our children if we are the parents, dealing with colleagues at the university or at work. All these are now become needs themselves, and only because they are felt as needs as important as the need. So why do people use WhatsApp? Because the communication need is so high, right? And so therefore now in the cultural evolution also we have now meta needs, right? But on the other hand, the permanent interests need to be maintained, formed, linked to imaginations, memories, and images, so that they endure the change we experience every day. So it is a big task. If you have learned a profession and you live from this profession, you must stay in the profession. You must keep yourself up to date with it. Learn new things change, technologies change. You must adapt. That was even true in the Middle Ages when you were working with to make leather out of animal skin. New technologies get invented, you must learn them, and so you must kind of maintain this. And so you must maintain the complex need architecture. So our society has an architecture of complex needs, and it's one of the most demanding psychological tasks of the individual in society, and is prone to failure. So if you think this needs architecture, it's so complex, and each individual has so many of them, and the balance needs to be maintained with the primary needs. And in COVID, you could see a breakdown of it, a partial breakdown of this, right? So this failed. So the need architecture, the balance of the need architecture was broken. So the social needs couldn't be fulfilled anymore, and a lot of irrationality emerged. And so this was a very good example. It's actually, in my lifetime, the strongest example of failure of the societal architecture. And it failed because somehow the balance was gone, right? And such failures can be observed in institutional instability or the inability to control aggression. So let's look at the first example. So right now, we have such a situation where institutional stability is endangered, right? You can see this that we have now riots in Western societies. And I mean, America has had mass racial riots since a long time, but we have now new types of riots and unrest, and the institutions don't work properly anymore. So they're taking decisions that are totally detached from what the population wants, and so on. And so in Germany, we are basically switching off our energy supply because there's an ideology demanding it, but nobody wants to switch off the energy supply, but they are switched off. And they actually, what they do is when they switch off an nuclear power plant, afterwards they actually destroy it with dynamite, so that it can't be reused again, and so on. So it's really fascinating, and so I see this institutional failure, and this institutional instability, it seems to us now quite spectacular, but historically it is not. Historically, it's very often the case that because the architecture of the complex need management, to all of which are linked, images, memories, imaginations, fantasies, and it's so brittle because it's so highly complex, it happens regularly that this becomes imbalanced. And at a lower level, at the individual level, it's a lot has to do with inability to control aggression. And Gehlen, in all his works, as a sociologist and philosopher and anthropologist, never talks about aggression. I find this highly fascinating that such a genius doesn't talk about aggression. Why not? Because he was actually writing during World War II and the Nazi time, which was a time of intense aggression, and he wanted to circumvent it. Because he never uses the word race or Jews, and nothing. He totally maneuvers around those critical topics of the 1940s, because he had to write during that time, and he couldn't, it was very lucky, he couldn't serve in the army because he had some minor handicap, I don't know, walking handicapment or something. He couldn't serve in the war, which was a great, unlike Reinach. Reinach served in the war and was killed in the
first war.
Yes, the first World War. And he would have written many great books, I'm certain. And Gehlen wasn't drafted, and so he could write this book. But he circumvented the topic of aggression. But of course, aggression is also an inability to control needs. It's a result of a need imbalance that arises. And so this happens in individuals all the time when people start to yell and so on. But it can also happen at the level of society, and you could see it very in COVID. Children playing in the snow were actually aggressively beaten up by policemen. Children, because they didn't wear masks and because they gathered when they were using Schlitten.
Sledge.
Yes, when they playing with sledges, they were actually hunted down by policemen, beaten, and so on. It is then when the institutions of the state become in this irrational way aggressive, it means that something's fundamentally wrong with this architecture of needs. And I think this is a passage where Gehlen sees this very clearly. He doesn't say that this is why he is writing happening in Germany, because he's very elegantly avoiding it, but it's very clear that he has got this in mind. Okay, now this is the first part of needs. Now we
have a break.
Yes,
for questions.
yes. Now we have a break for question. Then we come to the second part of needs.
I have a question. Why was he forced to write?
Who was forced to write?
Gehlen, you said that in the war he had to write.
No, he was forced because he had an inner need to write. That's what I mean. I mean,
So what was his position?
he was a professor of philosophy.
I see.
So he in Leipzig. And actually, what is a bit disgusting about this is that the position was held by a Jewish philosopher who was removed from the position. But it was not because of a machination of Gehlen. But he was removed from the position, then Gehlen was put into the position. Gehlen was also a member of the NSDAP, which was the only way to get a professorship in that time. But he was certainly not a Nazi. And because in all his writings there's nowhere a single trace of Nazism. He found it despicable, but he was in the NSDAP. For this he was attacked after World War II. But I think he was not even a Mitläufer. He really did. Yes, he entered into the party for opportunistic reasons. But if he wouldn't, but I even, well, can you defend this? I don't know. But he was certainly not a Nazi. And has never uttered any position that was Nazi-like. But he was in the NSDAP. And the next question.
The needs driving the urge to act.
Yeah.
When we look at Tycho Brahe not acting, is that itself an action? Does that fall? How does Gehlen deal with that?
He was acting. He wanted to be part of the social event.
Right.
And so this was highly ceremonial. And then the master of ceremony had this stick with a ball, and it was beating like this and then it was Tycho Brahe's role in the ceremony to say one predefined sentence as the leading scientist of the court, and he wanted to act in this role. And this was so important to him that he didn't go to the toilet.
Right.
And then he died of it.
And I was wondering though, is that suppression of the primary need an action itself? The suppression?
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
I think so. And it is also, it can be unconscious. For example, sometimes you stop breathing. So it's a wrong technique to endure pain. So the better way to endure pain is to breathe regularly and deeply, but sometimes you forget. And you don't do it, and so it can also be an unconscious act, right? So
you might ask Matthew if omissions and preventions are identical. That might be a question.
yeah, but of course they are non-acts, right? But I think that unconscious behavior is also acting. Because I agree with Scheler's definition that the soul is the center of the formation of acts, and they must not be conscious. Most acts are unconscious, I think. I agree with Barry on this. Next question, you have a question.
Do you think, Gehlen, with the views of institutions and how they come about through humans, do you think he's sympathetic to views of socially distributed cognition?
Can you repeat that? Sympathetic to?
Views of socially distributed cognition with these institutions and the way that things come about, and that we need the technologies and the other cognizers, and so environmentally dependent.
Yeah, so of course, totally. I mean, the question is this type of cognition you're talking about that makes the world go round. That for example the legal system works. That's for him a totally result of socially distributed cognition. But then in his chapter about cognition, it's called Cognition and Truth, he also talks about distinguished scientific cognition. And that's an individual's task that is done in an institutional context. So you always need institutional context, but there's a difference between this distributed cognition, like in the legal system, and Schrödinger's act of writing down the Schrödinger equation, right? And there's a fundamental difference, because this is really a lonely, sublime result, and it is possible because of the institution in which he is embedded, but it's not in the same way distributed as the legal system.
So in the latter case, it would be more, I guess, more like your cognition is more intersubjective dependent based on the institution that you find yourself in.
In which case?
In the
Schrödinger.
latter case, in the Schrödinger scientific.
Yeah, so Schrödinger needed like all scientists, the whole culture of the science he was swimming in, so to speak, to get to enable him. I mean, the best example is actually Einstein's general theory of relativity. So Einstein had assembled, also in the special, both in the special and the general theory of relativity, Einstein had assembled all the physics ideas. But he lacked, for example, for the special theory of relativity, which enables already the four-dimensional time space, he didn't know how to mathematically formulate it. And so he went to Minkowski. Minkowski told him how to do it. He wrote down the Minkowski space. And that was because Minkowski had before worked with Hilbert. Hilbert had invented these manifold spaces. And so therefore, he was basically, this is what I mean with institutional thinking, but it's still different because it's such an exceptional thinking. But in a way, it's also social based, based on intersubjectivity.
I like what you said, the culture of the science that you're trying to.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good way.
One more, then we go on.
You just said, replying to Matthew, that the center of acts, according to Scheler, is the soul. Will that be Seele or Geist?
I think he says person in this case. He says die Person ist das Zentrum der Akte. So he's cheating himself around it.
And person in German is feminine.
Yes.
And child is neuter.
Yeah. And so I think he says person, and but this is a very different, very complicated theory which we cannot cover today. Okay, now we come to drivenness.
So how much do you have because it's lunchtime?
1, 2, 3, 4. I still have. I would do this. Let me see. I think we should do one more slide to introduce the notion of drivenness, and then we can have the lunch break and continue. But I would prefer to finish the review of the book, and because I think the other topic about replicability I can do in 1 hour.
Yeah.
So now let's go. So we have covered needs, and now we cover drivenness. So all animate systems, which are organic beings, are driven, and that means that they transform matter into energy, which they use to maintain a state of organization in a world subjected to entropy. So if I take this, so a cup of coffee cools to the room temperature. We do not until we die. We are staying at 37 degrees. And we don't cool out here at room temperature. If any of us would be at 20 degrees Celsius, he would be long dead. So that means, and how do we do this? We do this by constantly transforming matter into energy. Humans have to do it by eating, but lower animals can transform minerals and sunlight into energy by photosynthesis. But always matter is transformed. I mean, plants transform matter and energy into energy. And all other life forms transform matter into energy. And this transformation, energy is actually, biochemically speaking, it's a type of molecule which contains 3 phosphate groups right next to another. Adenosine triphosphate is the most important one. And these 3 phosphate groups, they are highly negatively charged, and they want to get rid of the electrons. And this wanting to get rid of electrons is the energy. And it's a very, very compact way of storing energy in one molecule, a lot of energy. And so this is what we do to survive. This is drivenness in the basic sense. So the drivenness of plants and animals is limited. When an animal has, and so now this drivenness is limited in animals. So when an animal has it's full, it stops foraging and hunting and digests. And if you have a hunting animal like a lion who has just eaten a meal, the lion won't be interested in any prey. Only the interest starts when it gets hungry again. But human drivenness is boundless, especially with regard to the will for power. So the human drive is boundless. And so the will for power is a need to gain a higher proportion of limited resources than the others. That's Hobbes' definition of power. And so Gehlen thinks that the root of this insatiable will for goods and opportunities is overdrivenness. So he calls it like this. So what is overdrivenness? A being that is devoid of adaptation to nature is constantly under the pressure of inner and exterior tasks that need to be fulfilled. So the overdrivenness enables us to cope with our world openness and deficits. So the man has so many deficits And the world openness is so stressful that we need this higher drive level in the animals to cope. And so the overdrive seems to be geared towards the necessity to regularly overcome massive obstacles and to enable exceptional achievements needed for survival. So it's so difficult for man to survive without instincts, with his poor anatomy and mediocre physiology, that basically, I mean, if you compare a human to a dolphin, you know, it's just mediocre how we are physically. Dolphin is, the way the dolphin is adapted to water is fantastic. Gehlen was saturated with Western philosophy, traditional Western philosophy, but also very critical towards metaphysics. And he was one of the, I think, most important and most original philosophers in the 20th century. And so this is, he has several major works. This is the one about anthropology, that man. And the scheme is that animals and mans are fundamentally different. Animals are perfect beings. They are basically adapted to a natural habitat in which they function based on their instincts. Man is a defective being. He has no natural habitat and many defects. He's a world-open being that is basically exposed to an unfiltered array of sensations. He has a sensory overload. Therefore, he has to cope with this special position in nature. He has developed very high sensory motor skills, among them language as the highest one. And now we're in the middle of discussing drivenness. Okay, so that's where we are in the discussion of Gehlen's insights.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So, so we said, I think the last slide we looked was the overdrivenness of man. So that man has an overdrive that is very visible in the quest for power, which is unsatiable. And where does this overdrivenness come from? Gehlen argues that it comes from the position of man in nature, that it enables man to compensate for his deficits. So that man needs the overdrive to compensate for his deficits. And the overdrive seems to be geared towards the necessity to regularly overcome massive obstacles that man encounters because of his natural weakness, physical weakness. Animals have no overdrive, we said. So now we look more at the overdrive. So this chronic need of man, this overdrive, enforces the permanent planning process, which is also mostly an economic process, because it's about how do I get through winter. So animals don't have to plan how they get through, right? So birds automatically fly to the south. Mammals overeat before winter and automatically get a bigger fur. Then they sleep most of the time, and so on. So they have automatic ways to cope with the climate alterations of the seasons. Man has to plan for winter. Man has to store fuel to heat. He has to have to make provisions for food and so on. So man has to plan. And this leads to sociality, because without sociality, man cannot survive. And so sociality is the ability of man to form communities and societies. The community is a form of sociality which is small, where everybody knows everyone, is usually 25 people or less, a tribe. And also even a village. So I believe in the 15, so I think it's actually 15. My rule is 15 square. So 15 times 15 people, everybody can know everyone, a small village. But then it gets more difficult. You see this very well in companies. So companies which have the size of 15 squared or lower function quite well. But when they have more than 15 squared, you need a lot of rules and formal institutionalization, like in a society, to make companies work. And that has to do with when people don't know each other anymore, then mutual trust, which is a foundation, universal mutual trust, which is the foundation of communities, is replaced by mutual mistrust, which is that Scheler says about societies. And so sociality creates permanent demands on each individual, which can only be met with constant overdrivenness. So sociality is hard, right? So sociality means that you not only have to cope with your own, needs and expectations and imaginations, but also have to coordinate with society or with the other individuals all the time. So you need the overdrivenness to cope with the need of sociality, according to Gehlen. And like all mental properties of man, this is highly vulnerable. And this is so interesting. Depression is he doesn't say this, is it from me, but depression is primarily the disease of drivenness. So when you lack drive, you are depressed. And depressed people, they all the other symptoms of depression, absence of libido, anxiety, joylessness, lack of perspective. All of these symptoms of depression are tied into this primary problem of depressed people, that they have no drive anymore, and so they can't act. They just a heavily depressed person lies in bed. Or and if it's a mild or mid-range depression, a mild depression you can still force yourself to work, but already a mid-range depression, that's F33.2 code, you can't work anymore because you don't have the drive to work anymore. And so this is a 10% of human adults have recurring depressions. And so this shows you how vulnerable this mental apparatus is. So while only 0.5 to 1% have schizophrenia, 10% have depression, and this I mean organic depression. So I mean the depression that you also find in primitive societies. Of course, in the United States, the rate of mental disease is now at a quarter of the population, also in Germany. So it is the prevalence of mental diseases is, there's no other group of disease that has such a high prevalence, even heart disease. And arterial hypertonus and all of this, blood pressure, elevated blood pressure, they have lower prevalence than mental disease. And depression is now very prevalent, but a lot of this is cultural. But here I'm talking about organic depression, which is the same level. There's intercultural psychiatry, where psychiatrists have made empirical studies to have diagnosed, tribal nomads. And looked at them and diagnosed them, and they found the same rates of organic depression or endogenous depression than we have in the West.
I was just curious, because I know you have an MD, you said the LT code. Do they use the DSM in German?
Of course.
Okay.
Of course, yes. So anyhow, so lack of drive, and DSM is a very problematic classification of psychiatric disease because it's basically Humean. So it's based on the idea of David Hume that you must build up a classification system only from empirical findings. And so therefore DSM is quite dysfunctional because it doesn't allow, how can I say this? Classification of mental disease is based on a theory of mental disease. So it's a theoretical framework, and this makes it very, I think, very problematic in many ways. ICD-10, which now is superseded by ICD-11, was a bit better, but overall the classification frameworks are all very Anglo-Saxon in the negative sense, humane, And I have nothing against Anglo-Saxon philosophy, but it has weak spots, and one of them is this radical empiricism, tabula rasa theory of the man whose work you have there on your desk. So anyhow, lack of drive, and so depression shows us how important drive and drivenness is for man. Now I have a longer quote that I have translated yesterday. It is the exclusive ability of a being that has a drivenness which drives it beyond the momentary situation of need fulfillment to transform its world openness, and here I put in parentheses, and the burden that comes with it, into productive behavior and simultaneously integral. So this we have to understand first. So only the being that is drivenness and drive it beyond the momentary situation of need fulfillment can transform its world openness into productive behavior, and at the same time integrate super-individual states of affairs into its behavioral pattern as motives. So that means that we can actually take into account the intentions of our community or society in ourselves. So if I work at the post office as a clerk, I of course have a function that is a function for society. And I'm aware of this, and that's why I fulfill it. And I know that if I don't fulfill it well, there will be a lot of trouble and problems. And so with that, which means to develop tasks of higher order from generative social and economic context, which yield objective and different social orders. So this means that by doing this, societies evolve to create what he calls objective interests or institutions. And it's super interesting, when Gehlen speaks of objectivity, he always means the social. So the subjective is never objective, it's always individual. The individual is always subjective, and objectivity for him is a notion of society. And so this shows you to what extent his thinking is sociological also. I mean, he also has a notion of knowledge and truth, which is traditional, in the chapter on knowledge and truth in the last third of the book. But when he contrasts objective to subjective, subjective is the individual perspective, objective is the perspective of society. And this is very true. So, for example, if you think of extreme situations in society, now let's think of the climate change idea. So it doesn't matter what individual scientists say. It's only that there is now objective is that we have a climate crisis that is super dangerous and that we are going to kill ourselves if we continue to burn for fossil fuels. I think it's scientifically total nonsense. But it doesn't matter, because objective is not what is true in the scientific sense, but what is true for society. And so this is a very tough notion of objectivity, which is actually in competition with the view of objectivity that we find in thinkers like Immanuel Kant, Aristotle, or Edmund Husserl, who think that there is an objective truth that the individual has access to. For Scheler, this is to some extent not the case. So that the narratives, which are totally, he gives in the second big book, Urmensch, Spätkultur, Primordial Man and Industrial Culture, he gives I don't think that that's the official translation of the title, but I would translate it like this. In this book, he gives many examples of how what is objective is what is socially accepted by the group. And I think that's very true. And I mean, I never thought so much about it until COVID came. And so, anyhow, so this quote I translated it to give you a feeling for the complexity of his thinking and of his language and the depth of it. So now, what is the consequence of human overdriven? The consequence is, first of all, if you are overdriven, you need to suppress and postpone needs, because if you don't, you are committing excess. So these are needed to shape your overdriven man into a social being. Failure of this is visible in felons and psychopaths. So felons and psychopaths, I mean, not a one-time felon who commits, manslaughter as a in a car accident where he drove too fast, but of real felons, or psychopaths, they cannot sufficiently control and sublimate their drivenness, right? They live out their drivenness in an antisocial way. He doesn't actually, this example is from me and not from him, because he avoids talking about aggression. A healthy individual follows the formation necessity. So that means this is man's mastery of his overdrivenness and needs. It's a precondition for planning, sociality, and survival as a group and within the group. And so this is super interesting. If you are unable to master your overdrivenness, in a primitive culture, that means you are excluded from group, and that means death. Right? So when you're excluded in primordial culture from the hunter-gatherer group, you will die. You can't survive. And so this was basically their death penalty, was exclusion from the group. We find actually remnants of this in the Greek and Roman exile punishment. So Cicero says, ex ira ex ovo juvet consul hostem, which means either the consul, I urge the enemy, who was actually another senator, to leave, to be sent to exile, right? And this is against, he says this about Catilina in his famous speech against Catilina. And it is in this, there we still have this exile punishment, which was then overcome in the 17th and 18th century with when international law was invented by Grotius. So Grotius said that it's illegal to take away the nation, the state of belonging to a nation, the citizenship from somebody. It's illegal to create non-citizens. And he metaphysically, and then Pufendorf also wrote about this, and then it became basically impossible to do this. But it is still remnant of this. Now, excess-drivenness is the counterpart of the chronic need situation of an imperfect being. So because we are an imperfect being and have chronic need, we need excess-drivenness. Man's instinct reduction is not a weakness in this context, but a detachment of the necessities of nature, right? So we have less instincts, therefore we are detached of the necessity of nature. An interesting aspect of this is instinct reduction is the deperiodization of the libido. So man's sexuality is constant. And it's a constant drive in humans. Freud is all about this, right? I mean, in Gehlen it's just a paragraph, but Freud Freud's whole work is about libido. And Freud describes it in a very elaborate fashion, which is part of it is true, how sex determines all our activities, actions. And if you want the condensed version, you can watch the movies by what's his name, Manhattan and Woody Allen, which is basically the movie version of Freudian thought. And in animals, sexuality is periodic, and in man it is constant. And this is also an expression of the overdrive. And it permeates into many modes of action. Ultimately, the excess-drivenness explains the extraordinary deeds of heroes, artists, inventors, or scientists. All these people have sublimated their overdrivenness into something. And the negative example is the alcoholic, for example. And humans are socialized to domesticate this energy, and the self-domestication and discipline is a lifelong task. And chronic excess is then the lack of self-discipline. It's deadly, right? If you're an alcoholic, you will usually die of it. And so this means that the overdrivenness is, we have to have it because we have deficits. It's a counterpart of the chronic need situation, but it also requires self-domestication discipline. And this is very interesting because if you think of discipline, self-domestication, all of this, these seem to be Prussian values, you know, and or North European values. And it's actually nowhere before has anyone formulated a biological foundation for this. And actually, it's true that self-discipline, self-domestication you can find them in all societies, in all cultures. Of course, the Prussians excel at it really in a very radical way, but that doesn't matter. It's only a cultural specialty of the Prussians, but you find this in all cultures, otherwise you can't have societies. Because if with such a huge amount of drivenness, and it's true, yes, if you think of sexuality, it's a huge driver, and also the appetite for power and to put one's own interests above the interests of all the others. These are such strong drivers in society. We admire people who are very successful in achieving this, right? And so this requires a lot of self-domestication, and chronic excess can't. If you live in excess, you can't succeed. So this was the drivenness part. And the formation necessity is really very interesting because it explains how humans systematically shape their lives in this situation of overdrivenness. I find it very, very convincing. And this is not only true for the people at the top of society, but basically everyone. I mean, Adam Smith says that 2 or 3% of the adult society between 15 and 70, which was the working age of his time, can never be made to function. You know, those with mental diseases and so on. But all the others who participate in society, the 98%, they really achieve this in their own way. You know, at a lower level, if you're a clerk or if you're a surgeon, coronary heart surgeon, it's always that you have to master the drivenness and have self-discipline in some way. Okay, any questions on this part about drivenness? Yes.
I stand up and stand next to him.
I can come here. For the recording, you mean?
I can't make this recording,
okay.
But for some reason.
Okay, I think it's interesting because this looks a bit like, in a certain sense, like a critique of Nietzsche, right? Like something like Nietzsche, or there is this, or maybe even Freud, there is this recognition of like what they didn't call drivenness, of course, but with different terminologies. There is this idea of like irrational drivenness, whatever you want to call it. But here is taken in a positive way, while it was entirely negative for Nietzsche, and up to a certain extent negative. Maybe
I think Wille zur Macht in Nietzsche is not necessarily negative. So the will for power is a Nietzschean expression, and it's based in the end on Schopenhauer, but I don't think it's totally negative. I mean, Nietzsche, you have to, if you read Nietzsche, you have always to see that Nietzsche, before he became totally insane, always saw himself as part of enlightenment. he still thought that his philosophy is an Enlightenment-style philosophy. He was not like George Bataille and Heidegger, an enemy of Enlightenment. And so this you have to always consider when you read him. He was struggling with the metaphysics of Enlightenment, certainly, but he saw himself really as an Enlightenment philosopher in a strange way. As Freud has libido, and Freud has two big motives: Todestrieb, this is the death drive, and libido. And libido in Freud is not only negative. So libido, because libido for Freud is the root of sublimation, and sublimation leads to culture. So this is rather similar to Gehlen, but there's also Todestrieb. And Todestrieb is the death wish is the negative part. And this, interestingly, is the part that Gehlen never discusses. And my theory is because he lived during the Nazi time, right? And so he never discusses it, but of course it is a very, very strong force as well. And it must be domesticated as much as libido must be domesticated all the time. And usually, you know, when things turn bad, there are periods where it's not domesticated for an entire generation. So I give you two examples: 1618 to 1648, 30 years of constant violence in Europe, Germany especially, but also in other parts of Europe, and then really brutal, and then another example is the French Revolution until the end of Napoleon, 25 years of constant violence, right? And then third example, 1917 to 1945, permanent violence in Russia, right? And then after the World War II, you know, old Stalin was a bit milder. He made do with only 25,000 deaths per year, you know, to maintain his power. Before he needed 10 to 50 times more. But basically you have these periods where aggression and the death drive is not mastered by society anymore. It's terrible. Yes?
So you talk about the molecule, which is a very efficient energy store.
Yes, that's
and then you move from there to drivenness in the form of heart surgeons being driven to earn lots of money. I don't see the connection between the molecules.
Okay, so this was the Begriffsunschärfe I mentioned before the break. So drive and drivenness are so overdrive. So I should always say human drive and human overdrive, and drivenness is a physical phenomenon. So drivenness, all animals. So I would need to correct this in the next one. I just didn't have enough time. So drivenness is what makes all living organisms tick, and drive and overdrive is this, and animals also have drive, but they don't have overdrive. So drive is basically what keeps animals in this mode of wanting to survive and reproduce, and drivenness is just the basic physics of how the organism fights entropy. And overdrive is then a specific human aspect where there is more drive than the animals have to compensate for the deficits of the human physiology and anatomy.
What has to compensate?
Overdrive, the human overdrive is compensating the weakness of the human, the deficit character of human. This is excess drivenness is the counterpart of the chronic need situation of an being. But I think before we put the slides on the net, I need to make some corrections, and one is one you were pointing to. This was, I predicted that you would spot this. I had already said it before lunch. And I realized it myself, but I just didn't have enough time. So now we come to the core term in Gehlen thinking, it's this deburdening Entlastung. So deburdening is unique to man and can only be understood from the behavioral perspective. So consciousness is a phase of behavior, a view established by Peirce and James. And human cognition and thinking is a combination of perceptive and active behavior yielding an ability. And so when I combine perception and action in a certain way, I obtain the ability, and in humans it's cognition. That's also Peirce and James. The special biological situation of man forces him to detach himself from the immediate present. We've seen this. And the human has to work out his place in the world, and during this process acquires seeing as a symbolic perception, language, and imagination. So seeing, we are seeing universals, right? So when I look into the face of people I don't know, I see them as representative as individuals of classes. So one class is race, another class is obesity, non-obesity, athletic body build, non-athletic body build. So we perceive our environment first of all through universals, and then we narrow down to individuals. So by now, after several hours here, I start to see you as individuals, and this is what he calls seeing as symbolic perception, whereas animals only see triggers. So the orangutan sees the orange and he has a trigger that it's food and he will get it. And he doesn't see a universal. So there are many experiments that prove this. So when you put a rope and you paint it that it looks like a stick, the orangutan sees fruit that hangs somewhere that really cannot climb to. He wants to use a stick to get the food. So you know that orangutans have primitive tool usage. So he tries to pick up the rope. And then the rope doesn't work like a rope, of course. Then he's disappointed. Now you can do this 7 or 8 times. He will not learn that this is not the stick. So you can see there's no real knowledge of universals. And if you actually if you give him electric shocks or beat him when he tries to use the rope as a stick, he will learn. So you need to, again, as I said before, to intervene into the instinctive behavioral cycle with your conditioning. Many motoric impulses, and then of course we have not only symbolic perception but language and imagination. And imagination is, I think it's also very, when I reread the book now, I didn't realize this when I read it last time, how important this notion of imagination is for Gehlen. And I think he's right. It is very, very important that it has not been philosophically pointed out before in this way. So neither Husserl nor Scheler have this focus on imagination. Many motoric impulses are silenced and suppressed in humans. And so this is very important that animals usually follow their motoric impulses. So when they see something in reality, they react to it. And it's for them very hard to not follow an impulse. But humans silence and suppress the impulse. And when you look at a school class, I don't know, I mean, now the school class is such a mess in Germany. But if you look at a traditional German school class, it's all about the teacher in elementary school. Most of the work done by the teacher is to suppress motoric impulses. It's true. And the learning, if you think of the material that the child learns, it's the alphabet and basic, reckoning, basic calculations and so on. It's very little that they learn in the 4 years. They mainly learn to suppress motoric impulses. So it's so interesting when you look at my children, one of my children, when he was in the first grade of elementary school, he was a bit too young. I mean, he was 5 and he was, I don't remember, but he was quite young when he came to school, but he couldn't wait another year. German law was very strict. And so he was so in a dreamy child play mode. There was a playground in elementary school. He just walked out in the middle of the class because he didn't realize what the social situation was. And so this has to be, so to speak, conditioned out of the children. But it's not conditioning. It's really that basically higher way of motor behavior is learned that gives space and freedom of action for the pursuit of long-term interest. And this disciplining is first done by socialization, and then later on, children, of course, internalize the socialization, which is what Freud calls Über-Ich. So, and the self-discipline that I just mentioned on the slide before is the Freudian Über-Ich. And so then long-term interest can be pursued. And the deburdening now means that, I quote, man transforms his biological burden into chances of survival by combining his sensory, motor, and mental abilities to a higher level that enables overarching decisions, planning, and action. This is unburdening, and this is, of course, fascinating. It's a technique of human survival which can be observed in the basic structure of our sensory experience. The eye selects certain aspects, signs, within a situation, and the mind can immediately classify these signs. But this is not achieved by key triggers as in animals, right? But by experience and abstraction of reality to key signs that have a meaning for the process of planning and performing actions. And so that means that the first, when a child learns categorical thinking universals, it touches the things and it gets and acquires them, and later on it can imagine how the things feel if it would touch them, and then it can talk about them. And these steps lead to this selective view of the world. I mean, there are fascinating neuropsychological experiments. So how do humans look at the face of another human being of whom they think they know the human being? they look on the left eye, the right eye, several times, and then to the mouth and back to the eyes. That's all they look at. Then this is the way that ultra fast, they're very fast eye movements, the recognition works. And that's why actually the AI for face recognition that is now prevalent in China and will also be soon rolled out. So Britain is now, after Brexit, the laboratory of authoritarianism in Europe. And so first the authoritarianism is implemented in Britain, then it comes to Europe. And so there they have it, and it's all working with the same technique. So we have basically has been implemented by looking at eye and mouth shape. And so if you want to conceal yourself, you have to wear sunglasses and a beard that is so strong that it covers your lips. And then the system will fail. I actually told this to a friend of mine who needs to protect himself in the public. Yet he always wears an artificial beard now and sunglasses. Yeah, and the face recognition doesn't work. It relies on the same patterns that humans use. So basically this means that we have this selective perception, and the affordance of man, this is the key point, Barry, now. The affordance of man is fundamentally different from the affordance of an animal. The affordance of an animal is a trigger. Schlüsselreiz, what's his name? Konrad Lorenz called it. Key trigger, right? And human affordance is arising from the symbolic view of the world. So the world is not primarily seen as individuals. So if you walk through a forest, you don't see the trees as individuals, but they form the forest, and you know they're made of trees. If you get more interested in them, you say, oh, this is a beech, and this is this and that, or an elm, and so on. But before, it's just a tree, and this is how we work. We work by seeing the world first in universals and then in individuals. So I could never understand nominalism. And it was invented by a Briton, William of Ockham. Visual perception demonstrates the structure and function of deburdening. So the example of visual perception demonstrates how the original manifold of sensory experience is suppressed and deburdened to a selective perception of symbols that feed into universals. So we see the salient properties of the individual situation, and then we immediately classify the situation as a set of universals that are used to define the situation. So this happens.
Not a set.
Yeah, maybe it's a set.
It's a structure.
Yeah. Okay.
Set would just be a list.
Yeah, but sometimes it can be a set, sometimes a structure, but structure is certainly more correct. So let me try to find an example. So when you open a door and you get into a situation that you did totally not expect. So for example, you are in the university and you think you're opening the door of the library, but you're now in the middle of a debate. What happens? So first of all, you think this is not my situation I was expecting, and then you abstract from you don't listen to the debating people, you see people arguing, and then you think, oh, this is a debate. So you are classifying, and this is what he means, right? So and then later on you can again perceive the individuals, but usually perception works that by symbols that feed into universals. And some of this is also in Charles Sanders Peirce's theory of semiotics, which is also one of its innovative aspects. So it's it's actually a bit overdone and it's inconsistent, but he has seen some of this. We have obtained distance from the direct environment, can anticipate the sequence of events in many situations. So this is very important. So though the future is unforeseeable, so there are so many regularities in our environment that when we want to cross the street, we look left and right and we anticipate the flow of the cars. We know that even if there is no traffic light, upstream of us there is a traffic light somewhere, so at some point the flow of cars will see it and we can cross the first second of the street and so on. And man derives ability to live from his biological abnormal weakness via deburdening. Deburdening also describes the evolving indirectness of human behavior. So it's indirect, evolving indirect. This means that the higher the culture, the more indirect the behavior becomes, until you can annihilate mankind with one push of a button. That's probably the highest level of abstraction by starting nuclear war. Yeah? So it's just one button, but if you push it, then the world ends. I think you cannot get more abstract in practical reality. And man pushes many mental intermediaries between perception and action, which I've said several times. So there's this idea that in animal perception and action are tightly coupled, and then in man is able to push many layers in between. For example, the construction of a tool to make other tools is based on a chain of mental intermediaries. Themselves are all imagined, considered, depicted, and altered until they meet the need in a chain of postponed needs and long-term interest. You can see this very well. So Barry has a colleague here who is a new ontology guy. What's his name?
John Beverly.
John Beverly is very much into computers and software engineering. His thinking is totally like this, right? So software engineering is such a good example because it is engineering can be seen in action, whereas when buildings get engineered, the process takes so long. But when the software engineer engineers software, he does all this process that every engineer does in a very rapid sequence. And so what they do is they have a certain, goal, but so they see a situation, then they form a goal, and then there are many intermediaries are put there. These intermediaries is the structure of the program that is programmed. And then in all this, what is described here, imagining it, considering, depicting, thinking of alternative, all of this is typical of engineering, which is the elaborate fashion of this tool making that is usually the first tool was a Faustkeil, the stone was a sharp end, and the first man who made it was in a way a primitive engineer. And now the engineering is more and more, there are more and more layers, and these layers, some of these layers are, if you think of quantum mechanical applications, like nuclear magnetic resonance or the squid, which is a tool to detect very weak magnetic fields at a super high sensitivity. Some of the layers are pure mathematics, right? And they are all inserted between perception and action. This is then culture. So a simple example of deburdening is the design of movements. So as I said, first in the evolution of man, arms and hands are needed for movement, but at 10 to 14 months, children get up and start to use their hands to explore the environment. By playing, they test and experience it and train movement patterns in direct contact with objects, right? So, and then that's why you always hear regularly, you hear from the children's room, you hear a crying child because it hurt itself when trying to do that. So what is very typical is when they are 10 or 11 months old and they drag themselves up and they try something with their hand and they lose balance and fall. But they don't fall from a very high height because they are as tall as they are broad almost. But still, when the imagination is maturing, the child can imagine movement patterns and use movements to shape its environment in form of work play. So work play, this is a term by Gehlen, where he of course refers to Marx and says this is a kind of play that is like work because it's shaping the environment. And the movement then is also leading to cognition. The movement then become means to realize intentions and goal-driven behavior. And in this context, habituation is good. Now becomes habituation. So habitual behavior becomes automated and separate from consciousness. It thus forms the base of higher behavior. So let's look at piano playing. When you learn piano playing, first of all, you use the right hand to start to learn patterns, and then the left hand, then you learn to use them together. Then you are able to play Der fröhliche Landheim by Schumann, dam 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 dam, quite a primitive tune, but kind of nice. And then, but that's already with both hands. And then later on, when you play Liszt or Chopin, many of the simpler movement patterns are automated. Now you can actually, Liszt is so complicated, and now you can basically, already much of what you need to play Liszt is just not, you don't have to think about it, but now there are aspects of Liszt which require your attention. So you're getting higher and higher until you can really play Liszt, I could never do it. I was stuck at Der fröhliche Landmann. I gave up. So it thus forms the base of high behavior I just described with the piano. The same is true in surgery. Surgery is super complicated motor behavior, but surgeons also have elements that they do automatically, but then others are not automatic and so on. And all high mental abilities are made possible by the automation of basic behavior. So if you wouldn't have basic behavior automation, then you would spend too much energy on it. So the emotional and so basically the basic behavior becomes emotional, it's neutralized with regard to emotions and needs. So you don't feel needs anymore with regard to this behavior, you don't have emotions. So when you start to have piano, you suffer from the basic stuff. Then this becomes automated, you don't suffer anymore, it becomes neutralized with regard to emotion and needs. And then the energy of human drivenness is channeled into the higher activities. And this again is for every human, it's not only for scientists or so. And now community and society enable the fulfillment of the basic needs by division of labor. And so every individual is participating, and also every individual gets leisure time to fulfill its own goals. And so Gehlen calls this background fulfillment, so that society allows the fulfillment of the needs automatically in the background, and therefore every human being can participate in higher activities. And that's even true if you think of the feudal society. It's not true that the serfs were toiling like hell 24/7. What was happening is that the serfs of the feudal society had 52 Sundays plus 80 to 180 festive days, church days. So what we call bank holidays in England. So they had 130 days off, which is quite a lot, or 120 days off, right? So they had quite a lot of days off where they could basically relax. So there were 3 Christmas days, 25th, 26th, and 25th, 26th, and 27th. That's why the Matthew Passion has 6 parts, 2 for each Christmas day. The Christmas Passion, not the Christmas oratorium has 6 parts, 2 for each festive day, and so on, and so all more complex societies give room to the individual to have leisure and to fulfill its own goals, and that is possible due to the background fulfillment. And Robinson Crusoe, he can never rest because he's not in a society. So he has to do all this labor division on his own. So the only rest time he has is when he sleeps. Later, when he has Friday, he can rest a bit more. Then he starts to have some labor division and some form of sociality. But before he has this sociality, he can never rest. And this shows you, this is so interesting because it shows you that leisure is only possible with sociality. Yes?
So just let's think about the title here, because it's not expressed precisely. So what you mean is that deburdening amounts to the fact that the highest human capabilities are consequences of basic biological capabilities.
Yeah. Of basic biological position. That's correct. It's
okay. So then explain position.
So this is originally from Scheler, man's position in cosmos. So the position means that man has due to the devoidness of his biological anatomy and physiology, his weakness, his unadaptedness, has this deficit position. That's what is meant here. And the world openness, those two, which are 2 sides of the same coin, so to speak.
Okay, so this is actually saying that the really good things are consequences of something bad.
Yes. Basically, it's the same. It's poorly written. I'm sorry for this. I need to put a bit more, but it's here. Deburdening means that man transforms his biological burden into chance of survival by combining his sensory-motor abilities to a higher level.
Okay. All right. So it's not something bad. It's something good.
Deburdening.
Yeah.
Yes, but the biological position of man is a burden, and so we need deburdening. Yes, you also have a question.
To me, when I've read this, it seems that we create habit that becomes automated or skills.
Yes.
And then maybe from here falls out something like instinct because it becomes so automated. Does that
Yes.
feel right?
So he calls it. Yes, it's very good. He calls it instinct replacement. So because we don't have instincts that are genetically encoded, or very, very few, right? But the instincts are very, very close to the primary biological function. So coughing is not an instinct. When you mis-swallow something into your breathing tract, you cough. That's not an instinct, but that's a reflex. Cough. But that's a reflex. And then But for example, sexual behavior is the closer it gets to an orgasm is, for example, instinctive. Right? The patterns of movement are instinctive and so on. So there is some instinct, or breastfeeding and so on. But it's all very closely tied to biological functions. But the lack of instinct then is compensated by exactly this. So these are the kind of synthetic instincts that man makes himself. So, now I want to say something about the relationship of deburdening and sublimation for it. So Gehlen is close here to Freud's view of the social role of sublimation. The cultural achievements contain the energy that is freed by automating the fulfillment of basic needs at the individual society level. This is basically a statement that could be as well in Gehlen as in Freud. Magical rituals in primitive societies or magical thinking, modern society like COVID masking or vaccination cult, are so intense and can persist for so long because they fulfill the higher needs made possible by deburdening. Freud would say sublimation. So, and so therefore, so it's interesting that we have magical thinking modern societies as well, and all the time, and it's so long because they are basically addressing the higher needs. And deburdening is not the same as the subconscious mechanism of psychological processes, physiological processes. While consciousness is certainly the result of interaction with the environment from an evolutionary perspective. So the theory of consciousness, of course, that Peirce and others developed, is that it's a result of interaction with the environment, and so the higher the organism gets, at a certain level of complexity of an organism, the organism needs consciousness to survive. So bacterium, halobacterium that needs to live in a high salt environment has chemical sensors for concentration of ions, of metal ions. And when the concentration drops and it feels the gradients, it starts to move towards a higher salt concentration, like sodium chloride, for example. And this is not consciousness, but in higher organisms, consciousness is needed for survival in evolution. But the physiological process of the mind, which is the function without consciousness, are automated and cannot be elucidated by introspection. So this is very, very important. So we can only introspect a part of our consciousness, but we can't introspect the causality. So I can, if I feel my knee is in pain because I have an injury of the knee, I can establish a causal relationship between the pain and the injury. But the part of the physiological, the vegetative aspect of the mind, the breathing, the regulation of the heartbeat, sleep-wake cycle, sexual cycles, all of this is actually not, we can't introspect it. So we can't introspect what makes our heart beat faster. We can certainly feel, oh, my heart is beating faster, I'm excited about this and that, but we can't introspect the process really. And so Gehlen says very likely can they neither be explained by neurobiological experiment, observation, because the human mind is a complex system, which we cannot make model scientifically. This is what Gehlen says, this is what Barry and I say in our book, Why Machines Will Never Rule the World, in the chapters 9 to 12, where we basically go through the human capabilities such as consciousness and language and think and show why they cannot be modeled scientifically. And the theory of Gehlen is less based on physics and mathematics as we do it, but he basically uses Kant, Nietzsche, and Schopenhauer. And so I want to show you quickly why we cannot model the human mind. It's only in 5 minutes as a kind of excursus. So Kant believes we cannot model the human mind because our cognitive abilities have two modes: sensory perception, which he calls Anschauung of interior and external reality, and discursive thinking, reasoning and speculative thinking. So reasoning is establishing a law that when it rains the street gets wet, and speculative thinking is the higher reasoning, that's pure reason, called Vernunft in German. These are our two main cognitive abilities. He says. And we lack the ability for causal introspection into our vegetative process. He says, in Critique of Judgment in paragraph 77, because of the specific structure of our intellect, we cannot explain natural products, but only discuss and interpret them, he says. So and what we can do, and there he is also like Vico, he says we can explain only what we can technically make. So what we can technically make, we can completely causally understand, but what we can't technically make, we can only discuss and interpret. I think this is very true, and this passage is one of the, I think, I know that Barry is not a big fan of Kant, but and I also think that his ethics are terrible. But this paragraph is one of the most condensed and brilliant passages in the history of philosophy that was ever written. You should if you don't know the book, just read this paragraph. It's self-contained. It's just wonderful. And Nietzsche says the body has a great reason. Der Körper hat eine große Vernunft. The mind is small. And for him, perfect activity is unconscious, and the consciousness is always imperfect. So he believes that the best of man is what happens unconsciously. When you start to act consciously, it deteriorates. Schopenhauer says consciousness supports the perfection of the vegetative process as an adjuvant. It is not capable of understanding the vegetative processes. And we say in the book, the mathematical capabilities we have are insufficient to model complex animate systems synoptically. So synoptically means in the way that we really understand them fully. We can only model partial aspects. We cannot go beyond a certain type of mathematical model. So, and we will never be able to, because we believe, and I more so than Barry, that mathematics is a total resultant of the biological structure of our brain, and that therefore it's limited, and therefore we cannot model life adequately. So we use modern mathematics and thermodynamics to basically underpin what Kant, Nietzsche, and Schopenhauer more intuitively. And I think that it doesn't matter whether you have Kant's model of cognition or Nietzsche's totally, unsystematic intuition or Schopenhauer's very negative way of seeing the world. They all get the same result, and I think they're right. I think that the process, the vegetative process, are not accessible to consciousness, right? And so we can't introspect the secretion of insulin by the pancreas. But without it, we die, right? But we can't introspect and feel it and think about it. And the part about which we can feel is only a small part, which we can introspect, is only a small part of what goes on in our minds. And even this part is only the symptoms of the physical process that goes on, right? And the emanation of the process. And so we can only introspect this emanation like we feel fear. But how does fear come about biochemically, we don't know.
So surely Nietzsche is making a quite different point, which is that if you're engaged in a struggle for power and you stop to think, you probably lose the struggle.
But I think this statement really from the, I think it might be from the will for power, this statement, but I think I actually was lazy and didn't check. Well, I didn't have the second volume of the fully commented edition of Man with me because it's too heavy. So in the plane, so I didn't check where this quote is in Nietzsche. But certainly what Nietzsche thinks here is that that the automated function is much stronger than the non-automated function, and his view of perfection is that the unconscious is more perfect. I think that animals are always more perfect than human beings, and that so. But yes, the point is a bit. Actually, it's the choice of these three authors is directly from Gehlen's chapter on the human mind, and I've just put them together here, and then I've added our point of view just for fun. But it's interesting because basically our point certainly relates to it, but it's more derived from the perspective of modern science, which wasn't available to them.
Let me just add another note of caution with regard to, vegetative processes. We are learning more and more about the relationships between the genetics of plants, for instance, and their rate of growth and their susceptibility to different kinds of stresses. And so there doesn't seem to be any limit to our ability to understand.
I think so. There's a strong one, and I give you the limit. So in plant, I'm a red biologist and a green biologist, so I don't know so much about plants. But certainly it's very similar to red biology. So
red means blood.
Humans and animals is red biology, and green is plant biology. But the fundamental problem is the following: all the models we have that you were alluding to are monocausal models genetically, are all monocausal. So the whole pesticide stuff and improvement. So the improvement of a corn, so that the ring has more elements, grains to it and so on. This was not all done by classical breeding and not using molecular biology. So the green revolution of the 60s and 70s was a breeding revolution. So we don't understand how these traits come about. We just bred them like our ancestors have done it for 10,000 of years. Now to those traits that we have genetically engineered, these are all monocausal. And so we already oligocausal models we don't have for genetics in plants and animals. And now we are getting, and I can say this now quite well for tumor molecular genetics because that's what I now make my money with. in tumor molecular biology or cell biology, we do not find monocausal driver mutations in genes anymore. So we have 100 or so, and I mean few, a bit less, which we call the hallmarks of cancer. But now, since 10 years, no new ones are found. And that's because the easy stuff has been harvested away, and now you would need to have models that are capable of detecting more than that. And this is to a certain extent possible, but I can already see the limits very, very clearly. And this is, again, the same limits that we face in artificial intelligence engineering, that when the models become complex, or the reality becomes complex, the mathematical models are, even the very, very highly complicated mathematical manifolds that I now use in cancer research. So I use manifolds that are multidimensional, like the manifolds in general theory of relativity. And I stack several manifolds on top of each other. Each manifold represents one layer of experimentation. And then we stack them on top, so it's an array of manifolds. It's mathematically very demanding, and still it's so far away from biological reality. So, and the same is true in plant genetics. So I think the limitations are becoming very clear to see. And I'm not saying there will be no further progress and so on, but it's becoming harder and harder. And you can see this from the lack of progress in medicine in the last 40 years. I mean, pharmacology between 1880 and 1980 was making huge steps, right? I mean, 1880 was aspirin and morphine and cocaine, and then, insulin and penicillin, and then antidepressants and antipsychotics. The whole narcotics for surgery was revolutionized after World War II. And now, since 1880, there have only been a handful of real innovations.
1980.
Yes, sorry, 1980. A very small handful of innovation. And that's because of this. Because we are getting to this boundary where the mathematical models we have, are too weak. And that's why I think these guys are right. Well, anyhow, so now what about a bit more about consciousness? So consciousness arises in moving organisms. So Gehlen says that consciousness we don't have consciousness in stationary organisms, but moving organisms have consciousness to coordinate their perception and behavior in a complex and changing environment through which they move. So as they move, not only the environment changes, but they move through it, and that creates another dimension of change. And he believes that the patterns that are at work in non-conscious organisms are too weak to coordinate this. So consciousness is primarily geared towards the environment, because if you don't move in the environment, you don't need consciousness. The highest mental capabilities of the mind are used to guide, classify, and coordinate. We only consciously perceive just enough of the non-conscious processes to guide them, but have no introspective insight into them at all. They are black boxes. Only impressions and proprioception of the results of these processes reach our mind. So we can feel, I can feel that I'm lifting my foot now, that more weight is on the left foot, there's now no weight on the right foot, now there's weight on both feet, now this is the opposite. This I can feel. But the whole process that does this, I have no idea about it. I can only have proprioception of the result if I feel pain, and the pain is not pain from injury. I can't say where it comes from, and so the introspective processes of the physiology of the body for them we have no introspective insight. This is also, I think, a very, very important point, that we only scratch the surface with our consciousness that acts as a coordinator. And so, in other words, we have no access to the vegetative core of our existence, right? We can modify it so that techniques to influence our vegetative functions, like you can have breathing techniques to calm down. You can even, certain people can lower their heart rate and blood pressure by doing meditative exercises. You can certainly influence your sexual functions consciously, but in the end we have no access to the core. And so we can only describe the circumstances of existence and the means we have to survive and cope with life, but we cannot understand how this works. Therefore, the question of the sense of, and now it's funny, he's talking about the sense of life, and so he said, we can't answer therefore the question of the sense of life, and neither is it possible to say that we have to achieve something so that life makes sense. So this is quite a radical turn in the book where he said, okay, we don't have any access to our core, so therefore we cannot not talk about the question of the sense of life. So he has quite an anti-metaphysical stance here. And then he compares with Nietzsche, who says all conscious willing means value judgments might only be means by which something different than what appears in our consciousness is supposed to be achieved. And so there he is again very Nietzschean and anti-metaphysical by saying, you know what, we don't understand really what's going on inside of us. Our consciousness is just a coordinator of the superficial aspects of the vegetative processes. And then on the same page, he radically jumped into this conclusion. Therefore, he really writes, I can't really understand this therefore, but I wanted to share it.
Well, the sense of life, or the meaning of life, there's no answer that's going to be given by looking into your own body. You have to look into something larger, like Cologne
like God.
Cathedral.
What? Like
Cologne Cathedral.
Yeah. But not by introspection. That's probably correct. So,
Soon we need a break.
I think we could have a break now, and
Okay.
there are only 2 slides left. 1 slide is left. Okay, actually,
Okay, let's do the one.
we will do 1 slide. So now we come to the slide that Barry has requested this morning, which I kind of wrote 20 minutes before seeing this. So most human behavior is based on irrational certainty of experience. There's a chapter in the book called Irrational Certainty of Experience. It's chapter 29 or so. So he says that our industrial life world is a technosphere. He doesn't use the word, that's my term, but is a technosphere based on scientific attitude and its engineering applications. But the scientific attitude is an exceptional and very demanding long-term interest. And hexis is kind of a long-term stance. Right, Barry?
We don't use that word
Yes,
in English,
yeah.
but I know what it means.
Only pursued and cultivated by less than 1 in 1,000 humans in the Northern Hemisphere, and even less than 1,000. So even if 20% now, or actually now, I think in Germany 40% obtain some kind of university degree, only the true scientific attitude is only conducted by less than 1 in 1,000, and even now in German and also American universities, among the faculty, there are many members who don't have a scientific attitude at all. Right, who are just ideologues, for example, or politicians in a university setting where the university has become politicized. And in the Southern Hemisphere, it's even lower for historical reasons. And primary experience and cultural habits are not amenable to scientific thinking and determine most of our actions unconsciously. So we have primary experience, we have socialization, we learn cultural habits, and they are not at all compatible with our scientific world. So we live from habits and cultural stances in this technosphere that was built based on the scientific attitude, but we are not driven by science as beings. So the scientific notion of truth is not understandable by most humans. If you ask somebody what truth is, almost nobody can say, oh, there are 3 main theories of truth in the philosophical tradition: correspondence theory of truth, coherence theory of truth, and dialogue theory. The pragmatic one, which is the consensus theory of truth. So almost nobody can tell you this. They will say something. So basically, for people, truth means something different than what we mean as scientists. Instead, the people live based on irrational certainty of experience. Tradition, instinct, personal conviction, habit, collective non-rational intentionality. Vico, a genius, really, says fantasia certissima facultas. so not veritas certissima facultas, that would be Thomas Aquinas, or fides et veritas certissimae facultae. Facultates would be the right, because it's facultas facultates, and that would be plural anyhow. So, but he thinks imagination is for, what he means is that for the normal human being, imagination is the most important certainty. And these certainties are not instrumental, like in American pragmatism. So in American pragmatism, truth is instrumental, right? So therefore, James speaks of the dollar value of truth. But they give, and this is very American, and also it's to a certain way true if you regard at this industrial society with this instrumental aspect. But they give us images of how to lead our lives, right? These are images how to lead our life. and they're resistant to crisis and even failure. So if you have a traditional attitude, it takes very, very long to change it if it is deeply ingrained in the social fabric, even if they have crises and failures of this attitude. And ethical norms are not rooted in rationality at all, and we do not question them from this perspective. I mean, philosophers do, but normal people don't. And currently we experience a return, I think, of the irrational, even in science.
This is you or this is Gehlen?
This is me. This is me, and I think the return of the irrational surprised me. But now I understand much better where it comes from, because rationality and scientific attitude is a total exception, and it is actually the way we have it now. It was only invented in the early 17th century. You know, when Bacon published his work about science, Novum Organon. In the Novum Organon, it's described for the first time. This is only 450 years ago now, and so this is because the classical Greeks, they don't have the scientific attitude. They have the scientific attitude with regard to abstract thinking, but they didn't have the experiment. So the classical Greeks didn't have the experiment. So this is a very incomplete way of doing science. And our way of doing science, the Renaissance way of doing science, is historically totally exceptionally very demanding and seems to be, you know, it's not the norm, though our industrial life work is based on it. And so therefore now I think that the return to rationalism that we have also in science is probably fall back to the historical norm, sadly so. And my own, you know, Barry and I have a friend called Kevin Malik, and for him the biggest concern is that we have failure of epistemic norms in our society.
And I share this, but
now I think it's probably normal.
Because irrationality
is
so
the
this
bigger
was
drive.
So there's much more in this book.
So there's much more in this book.
covered
I think I covered
maybe
roughly.
I covered all the main.
I covered all the main
thoughts, but
there's much more detail, and I didn't cover many of the aspects of the later chapters.
But I think I
managed to show you the core of his thinking. Thank you very much.